Hi guys. Tonight we begin in a place where the wind howls like a restless animal, clawing at your face, biting into your bones, and smothering you in endless white. You trudge forward through knee-deep snow, and every step feels like dragging a heavy anchor. The cold gnaws at your fingers until you can't even tell if they're still there. It is a blizzard merciless, unrelenting, the kind that doesn't just make you shiver but makes you question whether you'll see another dawn. You probably won't survive this, at least not without a plan. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, post your location and your local time down in the comments. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. The storm closes in tighter around you, muffling sound until even your own heartbeat seems distant. Snow swirls into your mouth as you breathe, freezing the moisture on your lips, stinging your throat. You quickly realize that without shelter, without some form of barrier between you and this brutal sky, the world will simply erase you. It's a truth every Native American community living on the northern plains, in the forests of the Northeast, and across the snow-ridden West understood. Shelter wasn't optional, it was survival. A mainstream historical fact is that many tribes who lived in areas where winter blizzards were common, such as the Lakota on the Great Plains or the Ojibwe in the northern woodlands, adapted architectural methods that reflected their architectural environments. Their designs weren't arbitrary. They were engineered responses to weather patterns that could kill within hours. Unlike stone cities or wooden villages elsewhere, these were living, breathing structures, tipis, wigwams, and lodges that had to endure snow loads, shifting winds, and temperatures that could drop far below zero. You huddle your shoulders as another blast of wind drives ice into your face. You can almost picture what it must have felt like for a Dakota child clinging to a mother's cloak, stumbling into camp as tipi poles swayed under the weight of snow. The child doesn't understand the science of insulation, convection, or the aerodynamic angle of hide coverings, only that inside, a fire flickers and a circle of family waits. But here's a quirky tidbit. Snow itself, which feels like the enemy, is also one of the best insulators. Pack it tightly, and it traps air in tiny frozen pockets. To this day, scientists note that igloos made entirely of snow can remain dozens of degrees warmer inside than outside, heated only by body warmth and a small flame. Native groups on the plains didn't live in igloos, of course, but they sometimes banked snow around the bases of tipis to block wind, turning their lodges into natural thermal bottles. Imagine tucking snow up against your walls, not out of despair, but as a deliberate survival tactic. Historians still argue whether the earliest shelters on the plains were primarily adaptations of mobile summer homes or entirely different designs suited for winter. Some say the first lodges were purely temporary, meant only for brief storms, while others insist that communities had permanent strategies for surviving weeks of relentless snow. The debate lingers, like the echo of a storm across centuries, reminding you that even the scholars cannot pin down exactly how every group faced the cold. The wind moans around you, carrying voices that seem both real and imagined. You pause, straining to hear, and in that silence you realize the same thing. Countless ancestors realized, survival in a blizzard isn't about standing alone. It's about finding a way to bend nature into something habitable. That might mean snow-walled shelters pressed into the side of a hill, or a buffalo hide tent pitched carefully so that smoke can escape without letting snow pour in. The cold is still unbearable, but you can already sense the outline of warmth ahead. Faint orange flickers through cracks in a lodge wall, perhaps, or the smell of smoldering cedar. The first lesson is clear. You cannot outmuscle a blizzard. You have to outsmart it. And the people who once called these lands home were masters of that art. You take another slow step through the drifting snow, and as your eyes adjust to the swirling white, you begin to imagine what their shelters must have looked like, rising in the distance, defiant beacons against a sky determined to erase them. The fire is just a spark in your imagination for now, but even that spark makes your frozen hands twitch as if they remember what warmth used to feel like. Fire, in any winter story, is the line between life and death, and in a blizzard, it is more fragile than you might think. The irony is cruel. You need fire most when snow and wind try hardest to smother it. You crouch down, picture yourself fumbling with tinder, your fingers stiff, clumsy, barely able to strike a flint against steel. You can almost hear the scrape and the reluctant crack of a spark. Native Americans across blizzard-prone regions were ingenious in keeping those first flickers alive. On the northern plains, dried buffalo dung was often used as fuel because trees were scarce and wood was too valuable to waste on casual flames. If you wrinkle your nose at the thought of burning dung, remember that it smoulders slowly and evenly, creating just enough steady heat to keep a lodge livable. In the forests farther east, tribes relied on split cedar, birch bark, or resinous pine, each chosen not just for availability but for its ability to catch quickly even when damp. A mainstream historical fact is that fire-making wasn't an afterthought in shelter design, it was central. Lodges, tipis, and wigwams all revolved around a hearth in the middle, with a smoke hole above. The fire wasn't only for warmth, it was for light, cooking, drying wet moccasins, and keeping away the psychological collapse that comes when you sit too long in the dark. It was the beating heart of survival. Now, here's a quirky tidbit. Some tribes carried glowing coals wrapped in bark or tucked in a horn as they moved camp in winter. Imagine it, people trudging through snow, holding not just tools and food, but the actual embers of last night's fire like a fragile treasure. It meant less time striking sparks in freezing winds and more assurance that warmth could be coaxed back quickly. Even today, archaeologists sometimes unearth remnants of fire-carrying containers, silent evidence of this very human obsession. Don't let the flame die. Of course, historians still debate whether fire alone could make a flimsy shelter habitable in a full-force blizzard. Some argue that the lodges were so cleverly insulated that even a small flame was enough, while others think multiple fires or heavy reliance on heated stones was necessary. That question lingers, unresolved, but what's clear is that once a fire caught, the entire rhythm of survival changed. Picture it with me. You've just knelt in the snow long enough to coax smoke from a tiny pile of shredded bark. You bend low, blowing gently, and suddenly it catches an orange thread glowing against the dark. The relief is overwhelming. Your shoulders drop, your chest expands, and a deep exhale fogs the air above you. You pile twigs on, then thicker branches, until the flame roars. The crackle drowns out the storm's moan. Inside your mind, you're already warmer, even if the wind still howls. Inside a wigwam or lodge, the placement of fire was everything. Too high a flame, and smoke fills the room, stinging eyes and lungs. Too low, and the heat never rises enough to push away the cold seeping through walls. Children were taught early how to read the fire, how to know when to add pine needles for a sudden flare, or when to bury coals under ash so they would last until morning. Those lessons weren't written down. They were lived night after night. You lean closer, imagining the smells. Not just the scent of burning wood or dung, but the mingling of dried herbs placed deliberately on the fire. Sage, sweetgrass, cedar, each chosen for purification, or simply for comfort. The smoke curls upward, carrying with it both warmth and meaning. Every blizzard was also a test of spirit, and the hearth became a sacred point where family, memory, and survival fused together. The storm outside doesn't relent. Snow rattles against hides or bark walls like a drum played by 1,000 restless hands, and still, inside, there is fire. Children cluster near it, their cheeks red from heat, their backs chilled from drafts that sneak in at the edges. Women stretch hides above the flames to soften them for repair, and men crouch close, warming stones they will later place beneath blankets. The fire's glow flickers on every surface, a rhythm of light against the chaos beyond. Have you ever tried to sleep without firelight in a storm? Darkness feels thicker, heavier. Your ears strain, your breath shortens, and fear presses down like the snow outside. But with fire, even a small one, you feel tethered to life. It's the same instinct that draws you now, in your imagination, closer to the flames. You stretch your fingers out, and for a moment you forget the storm entirely. There's also a practical humor to it. Elders joked about how smoke seemed to follow whichever way you shifted, no matter where you sat today. Children laughed, rubbing their eyes, coughing as if the smoke itself was teasing them. Survival wasn't just grim determination. It was these little moments of humanity that made the blizzard survivable. And still the risk was real. One mistake, fire too close to dry hides, sparks landing in the wrong place, and the very thing keeping you alive could consume your shelter. Stories passed down spoke of Tipis going up in flames while families scrambled into the snow, forced to choose between freezing and choking. The delicate balance between fire's gift and fire's danger was something everyone learned to respect. Outside, the blizzard continues to thrash, but here, in the glow of the fire, you realize something profound. The first flickers are not just about heat or cooking. They are about claiming a small corner of the world where the storm doesn't rule. You, fragile as you are, have wrestled back a sliver of control. You shift your shoulders, imagining smoke rising, sparks flying into the night, and children finally curling into sleep. Fire is more than warmth. It is confidence in the face of nature's fury. And as you stare at those flickers, you know the next step will be to find walls, any walls that can hold this fragile flame against the storm pressing harder outside. The fire glows in your imagination, steady now, a tiny ember turned into a defiant heart beating against the storm. Yet as you press closer, you feel the truth pressing back. You cannot survive long with only flames. Fire alone will not stop the endless cold slicing through the air. You need walls, a barrier, something to block the blizzard's claws. You glance around the whitened world and realize with a wry smile that the very thing trying to kill you, snow, is also the only building material piled high in every direction. Snow, your enemy, must become your ally. It feels absurd at first. You scoop it into your numb hands, and it flakes apart, light as dust, fragile as powdered sugar. How could this delicate frost ever keep you alive? But Native Americans, like Arctic peoples farther north, understood the paradox. Snow, when packed tightly, does not melt away in minutes. It holds air, thousands of tiny pockets that trap heat, turning a frozen drift into an insulator far superior to bare wood or hide alone. You stack it higher, shove it into place, and slowly you begin to carve a wall that does not collapse. The storm howls, but behind your snow wall, the wind suddenly feels less sharp. A mainstream historical fact is that many plains tribes, when storms hit, intentionally shoveled snow around the base of their tipis or wigwams, creating a seal that blocked drafts. Archaeologists studying winter campsites find evidence of packed snow rings that acted almost like foundations. These weren't accidents. They were deliberate designs, transforming flimsy skin lodges into storm-proof shelters. The lesson? Nature gives you the problem and the solution at once if you're clever enough to see it. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some communities built small snow huts, not as permanent homes but as blizzard refuges along hunting routes. Imagine trudging across an endless white plain, suddenly caught in a storm, and remembering the hut dug into a drift by hunters weeks before. You stumble inside, find it cramped but dry, maybe still lined with old pine boughs. Not a palace, not even comfortable, but in that moment it feels like the finest lodge you've ever known. Historians still argue whether these snow-built shelters were common across the plains or rare improvisations. Some researchers point to oral traditions describing hunters burrowing into drifts for safety, while others caution that those tales may reflect extraordinary survival stories rather than everyday practice. The uncertainty lingers, like faint tracks half buried by fresh snow. But whether occasional or widespread, the principle remains clear. Snow could save as easily as it could smother. You picture it now. You drag your weary body to the lee side of a hill, where snow piles naturally. With your hands, or maybe a horn spoon or a shoulder blade used as a shovel, you scoop out a hollow. The storm muffles as soon as you crawl inside. The air suddenly still, almost too still. You breathe heavily, listening to the snow's eerie silence. Outside, wind shrieks. Inside, you feel as though you're wrapped in thick blankets of frozen wool. It is not warm, not yet, but it is not deadly either. And that difference is everything. Inside a village setting, snowbanks often became part of children's games. They built tunnels and forts, tumbling in laughter, while adults eyed the structures more practically. Sometimes those playful constructions became genuine refuges in sudden squalls. Children unknowingly practiced survival with every snowball fight and every carved-out burrow, learning lessons in architecture disguised as play. Perhaps you can hear their squeals echoing faintly even now, a reminder that even in harsh winters, life pulsed with moments of joy. The snow wall's smell is crisp, metallic, like breathing in iron filings. Your hands are raw, your skin tight, but there's something comforting in pressing against its solidity. No longer just powder drifting aimlessly. The snow has become structure, intent. You trace the curve of your wall and marvel at how the blizzard that sought to erase you now shelters you. That irony brings a smile, a small joke shared with the storm itself. You wanted to bury me, but I'll borrow your blankets instead. You lean back, remembering that other tribes in the northern forests added spruce boughs or bark to the inside of snow-packed shelters, layering them for insulation. They understood that snow alone was helpful, but snow plus organic matter created a real defense. Hunters lined the ground with furs, trapping yet another layer of warmth beneath them. Your imagination fills in the textures, the prickly bite of spruce under your hands, the musty fur smell, the faint drip of melting snow as heat slowly builds. There is a rhythm to it. Snow packed outside, hides stretched within, fire in the center, and bodies pressed together. Each layer multiplies the effectiveness of the others. Alone, none is enough. Together they transform a death sentence into a survivable night. You pause on that thought because it feels almost like philosophy. Isn't that the secret of human survival in every age? One fragile element isn't enough, but layered together, they endure. The storm groans against your makeshift barrier, pounding like fists demanding entry. You close your eyes and imagine how countless winters must have sounded from inside a snow-reinforced teepee. The shriek of wind overhead, the dull thud of snow sliding down hides, the occasional groan of a pole bending under weight. Each sound carried a message. Children learned to listen, to know whether the structure was holding or whether urgent repairs were needed. Their ears became their early warning system, sharper than any tool. As you sit in your snow-walled refuge, you realize another truth. Snow, for all its chill, has a softness when used this way. It muffles, it quiets, it turns the world into a muted cave. In that silence, people found not just survival but a strange kind of comfort. Maybe that's why songs and stories filled the long nights. With the blizzard raging outside, the muffled stillness inside became the perfect stage for voices. Words bounced gently from wall to wall, stories of ancestors, of spirits, of the delicate dance between people and nature. The fire flickers faintly in your mind's eye again, smoke curling through the small vent you've left. The snow glows faintly orange, translucent like frosted glass. You imagine your breath condensing, your eyelashes rimed with ice, and yet, against all odds, warmth beginning to spread in your chest. Snow, the destroyer, becomes your ally, and you understand why Native American ingenuity is remembered not just in grand ceremonies or hunts, but in these quiet, desperate acts of survival. Snow drifts endlessly outside, but within your walls, you feel alive. You close your eyes, lean against the frozen surface, and let yourself believe that, at least for tonight, you have outwitted the storm. The snow wall holds, though the blizzard still claws with icy fingers at every seam. You shift your weight, letting the fire's glow dance against your half-frozen cheeks, but already you sense the storm's persistence. Snow piles higher, winds slam harder, and you know your makeshift drift hut will not last forever. That is when you begin to think of something larger, sturdier structures built, not just for a night, but for whole seasons of merciless winter. You picture them rising against the storm, tall conical tipis, their poles lashed tight, hides pulled taut, standing like defiant spears thrust into the sky. The tipi is one of the most recognizable shelters of Native American life on the Great Plains. Yet what many forget is how well it endured not just gentle breezes, but crushing winter skies. The conical shape was not aesthetic, it was aerodynamic survival. Winds whipped around the tapered sides, sliding off rather than battering flat surfaces. Snow piled on the hides, but rarely stuck long enough to collapse them. With every gust, the tipi flexed and swayed, instead of snapping like a rigid log cabin might. The blizzard tried to push, but the tipi bent and whispered, "Not today." A mainstream historical fact, tipis were constructed from a frame of 12 to 20 long poles, often lodgepole, pine or cedar, forming the skeleton of the cone. Over this, buffalo hides were stitched together into vast sheets, sometimes as many as 12 to 15 hides in a single covering. In summer, flaps could be raised for ventilation. In winter, every seam was lashed tighter, every flap sealed down, and often extra hides were draped to double the thickness. Families could add inner linings of hides or woven mats, creating an insulating dead air space between the walls. These weren't casual tents. They were engineered for survival on the endless frozen plains. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some accounts describe families digging shallow trenches just inside the tipi wall during winter, placing sleeping mats in those hollows. The result was like a sunken bed where heat pooled, while cold air drifted lower along the outer walls. Think of it as an early version of underfloor insulation, carved straight into the earth. Practical, clever, and oddly comfortable if you ignored the occasional scuttling insect or melting snowdrip above. Historians still argue whether the tipi was primarily a mobile summer house that happened to be adapted for winter, or whether it evolved specifically with harsh winters in mind. Some scholars point out that the earliest evidence of tipis predates the widespread use of horses and may have been smaller, less permanent. Others insist that the true brilliance of the design only revealed itself once large bison hide covers and horse-drawn transport made winter survival on the plains more viable. That debate simmers quietly in libraries, while the wind outside your imaginary tipi roars like an angry god. Step into that tipi in your mind. The blizzard shrieks beyond, but inside, the air is calm, scented of smoke and hide. You glance upward. The smoke hole at the top is partially closed, angled just right to let the smoke escape, while blocking most of the snow. Snow still swirls in now and then, flakes drifting like lazy ghosts into the firelight, but they hiss and vanish as soon as they touch the flames. Children giggle when this happens, as if the snow is playing with them, daring them to catch it before it melts. The structure itself groans faintly as wind presses against it, but those poles, thick, straight, seasoned from years of growth, do not yield. They creak, they bend, but they do not break. You run your hands along the inner lining of hides. They are rough, scarred, sewn with sinew that once held muscles together. Each stitch is precise, placed by hands that knew the cost of weakness. The hide walls are not smooth or perfect, but they hold against the storm like armor. Now imagine the soundscape. Outside, the roar of the blizzard, the whistling rush of wind past the tipi's sides, the thumps of snow collapsing from drifts. Inside, the pop and crackle of burning dung or pine, the occasional cough, the murmur of voices sharing stories. The two sound worlds overlap, but never fully invade each other. You feel suspended between chaos and calm. That balance is survival itself. You settle in, pulling a fur over your shoulders, and listen as an elder speaks. He recounts a time when the blizzard buried half the camp. when poles bent low enough to make people think the whole sky was collapsing. The children lean close, eyes wide. For them, the tale is thrilling, like a ghost story. For you, it is a reminder that these tipis weren't just homes, they were lifelines. Each pole, each hide, each flap was a deliberate choice against death. The tipi's interior glows warmly, but you notice smoke building again, stinging your eyes. You shift to sit lower, where the air is clearer, marveling at how families instinctively arranged themselves in such spaces. The fire in the center, sleeping places radiating outward, elders closest to the warmth, children tucked against parents, storage along the outer edges where the cold lingered. It was social order shaped by climate, by necessity. And here's another odd truth. Tipis were designed to be dismantled quickly, even in winter. If herds moved or storms worsened, poles could be pulled, hides rolled, and the entire home packed onto a travois, dragged by horses or dogs. It meant no matter how harsh the blizzard, the people were never locked into one doomed spot. Mobility itself was a kind of shelter, a freedom settlers in their log cabins often lacked. You shift your shoulders under your imagined fur, realizing how genius that mobility must have felt. Imagine watching a storm roll across the prairie, knowing you could move your entire house away from its worst path. Settlers often scoffed at tipis as primitive, but those same settlers sometimes froze in their immovable cabins while the so-called primitive designs adapted and endured. There is a lesson there, one perhaps more relevant to our modern world than we care to admit. The storm outside does not ease, but you no longer feel its terror. Within the tipi, fire warms, hides insulate, poles bend but do not break. You have a space, however fragile, that the blizzard cannot claim. You close your eyes, listening to the layered sounds, breathing in the mingled scents of smoke and leather, and let yourself believe just for this night that the blizzard cannot touch you. The tipi bends but holds, a marvel of mobility. Yet as the storm drags on and snow stacks higher, you begin to imagine something different, something that does not sway with the wind but crouches low, immovable, like a fortress pressed into the earth itself. Not every Native American community roamed the plains chasing herds. Some built homes meant to outlast weeks, even months, of brutal winter. When you step into this part of the story, you step into the realm of earth lodges, massive, soil-covered shelters that looked less like houses and more like sleeping beasts beneath the snow. If you squint in your mind's eye, you can almost see them. Round or oval structures, thick timber frames packed with willow, brush, and finally layers of earth. Snow smothered them from above, but instead of collapsing, those heavy roofs turned stronger, as if the land itself had folded over to shield the people inside. Historical records from explorers and traders make it clear that earth lodges were engineering feats. Some were 30 or 40 feet wide, with roofs so solid that a person or even a horse could walk across the top without breaking through. Villages of them stretched along rivers in places like the upper Missouri, where the Mandan and Hidatsa built communities that glowed like small, stubborn constellations of light in otherwise frozen darkness. These were not emergency hideouts, they were castles against the storm. One curious detail is that some earth lodges doubled as storage freezers. By digging pits into the ground floor and sealing them with clay or hides, families could preserve dried corn, squash, beans, and meat through the harshest months. You can picture it now, snow raging outside, but under your feet lies a cache of food sealed away like treasure. That simple trick transformed survival from desperation into stability. The academic conversation about these lodges is lively. Some researchers argue they evolved directly from temporary brush shelters, gradually becoming permanent as populations grew and agriculture demanded stability. Others insist they were a distinct architectural leap, developed through long contact between groups in woodland and prairie environments. The truth may never be pinned to a single origin, which somehow makes these structures even more fascinating. They sit at the crossroads of mobility and permanence, adaptation and invention. Step inside one with me. The air is dim, thick with the smell of clay and smoke. A wide entrance, often facing east to catch the morning light, slopes down into the main chamber. The floor is sunken, dug into the earth itself, lowering the living space below the worst of the wind. Around the perimeter rise sleeping benches layered with furs. At the center, as always, burns the fire. Smoke gathers high in the conical roof, escaping through a vent hole that doubles as a faint skylight. You feel the temperature difference immediately. Outside, the blizzard rages at sub-zero fury. Inside, it is not balmy, never that, but survivable. Warmth radiates from the central fire and clings to the earthen walls, which release it back slowly, like a giant thermal battery. Children huddle with their mothers, elders recline, traders argue over dried meat, and laughter mingles with coughing smoke. The lodge is more than a house. It is a breathing organism, alive with every voice and every spark. The atmosphere is communal in every sense. Dozens of people might sleep in one lodge, their breaths rising in misty clouds. Privacy dissolves, replaced by intimacy, a constant awareness that survival is shared. You might find that strange imagining so many bodies crammed into one circular room, but when the wind howls and the snow piles higher than your shoulders, the closeness feels like reassurance. Oddly enough, the roofs of these lodges sometimes doubled as workspaces. Women sat above on warmer days, drying squash or sorting beans, while children scampered and played, their footprints leaving patterns across the earthen crust. Imagine being a child chasing your friend on the rooftop, only to tumble into a drift below, laughing as if the snow itself were a game board. Inside, ceremonies unfolded that carried as much weight as the storm outside. Warriors painted faces by flickering firelight. Shamans murmured prayers. Dancers stamped bare feet against the hard clay floor until the drumbeats echoed like a second heartbeat within the walls. Even during whiteouts, when travel was impossible, life continued. Songs rose. Marriages were celebrated. Stories were told. The storm could rage for weeks, but within those lodges, the community's pulse never faltered. Think for a moment about the materials. Timber was hauled from river valleys, stripped and notched carefully, set into post holes like the bones of a rib cage. Willow and brush layered over them, woven tight. Then came earth, tons of it, shoveled, packed, patted into place. Every handful was labor, and every handful was a promise that winter would not win. It's humbling, really. Survival built not of metal or brick, but of patience, sweat, and the very soil underfoot. Researchers still disagree about how long each lodge could last. Some say only 10 or 15 years before roofs sagged and walls collapsed. Others claim with steady maintenance they endured for decades. That debate lingers like the smoke curling toward the roof hole, but no one disputes their effectiveness. Accounts from fur traders confirm that while their own cabins groaned and cracked, these earth-clad domes endured storm after storm with little more than a muffled sigh. Imagine yourself bedding down now on one of those benches. The blizzard outside is no longer terrifying, it's simply background noise. You can hear it faintly, like distant surf, while inside warmth radiates from the central fire. Someone stirs a pot of cornmeal, another sharpens a tool. Children drift to sleep clutching small toys carved from bone. You close your eyes and feel the earth itself holding you, steady, heavy, protective. In that silence, a thought flickers. What if permanence is its own form of courage? The Tipi bent with the wind, ready to move when the herd moved. But the Earth Lodge said, "We will stay." Through storm, through hunger, through years of snow, it rooted itself like a stubborn tree. There's resilience in mobility, yes, but there is also resilience in refusing to be chased away. The blizzard, relentless as it is, cannot breach these walls tonight. You roll onto your side, listening to the muffled beat of a drum somewhere deeper in the village, and you realize winter has not been defeated, but it has been contained. The earth itself has been persuaded to lend its strength, and for now, that is enough. The Earth Lodge feels steady, immovable. But not every community wanted to root itself so deeply. Imagine yourself moving eastward, where forests crowd close, lakes glitter under snow, and the blizzards arrive less as sweeping prairie storms and more as dense, smothering curtains of white that drift silently between trees. Here, another kind of shelter rises, the wigwam, rounded and graceful, its frame bent like a giant ribcage, its walls sheathed in bark, mats, or hides. At first glance, a wigwam might seem fragile compared to an earth-covered fortress. Yet step closer, and you'll notice its genius. The dome, like structure, spreads the weight of snow evenly across its curves. So instead of piling dangerously on flat beams, the snow simply slides away, drifting to the ground where it can do no harm. The shape is as much protection as the material itself. It is well documented that wigwams were a hallmark of many Algonquian-speaking peoples in the northeastern woodlands, from the Wampanoag to the Ojibwe. Constructed by bending saplings, often cedar or ash, into arches and lashing them together, they created resilient skeletons that could withstand harsh gales. Over that frame, mats of woven cattail reeds, slabs of birch bark, or stitched hides were layered, forming walls that breathed but did not yield. When winter pressed hardest, families added extra coverings or banked snow around the base to block drafts, transforming modest domes into weatherproof cocoons. One curious image comes from early European accounts. Travelers wrote with amazement that these bark and hide homes were far warmer than the settlers' own drafty cabins. A bark wigwam, lined with fur and lit by a central fire, could remain cozy even as the forest outside froze solid. Picture a weary explorer stepping inside for the first time, expecting misery, and instead finding warmth curling up from the earth floor and smoke filtering gently through a vent. Experts still disagree about the precise origin of wigwam forms. Some suggest they evolved from temporary lean-tos built by hunters, gradually refined into permanent winter houses. Others argue they were always intended as semi-permanent, balancing mobility with endurance. The argument has no tidy resolution, but the debate itself reveals how central these structures were to survival. They weren't afterthoughts, they were lifelines. Step into a wigwam in your imagination now. You duck under a low flap, and immediately the wind dies away. The scent is earthy, resinous, tinged with smoke. Your feet find pine boughs laid across the floor, their needles still carrying hints of sap. Around the walls hang drying strips of venison, glistening in the firelight. Children sit cross-legged, playing with carved toys, while an elder feeds thin twigs into the flames, coaxing the smoke to rise just so. The dome curves above you, intimate, protective, almost womb-like in its embrace. Oddly enough, some wigwams were decorated with patterns scratched into bark or painted onto mats, spirals, animals, clan symbols. To an outsider it might look like ornament, but to those inside it was identity, memory, a reminder that even the smallest shelter carried the spirit of its people. Imagine drifting to sleep under a painted bear or turtle, feeling that guardian presence while the blizzard prowled beyond. The acoustics inside are unique. Sound doesn't echo the way it does in a tipi or a large earth lodge. Instead, voices soften, wrapping close, so that even whispers seem to touch everyone. In that muffled atmosphere, stories flow. You can hear an elder recounting how once, during a storm, a wigwam's bark panels froze so solid they gleamed like glass, trapping light in eerie reflections. Children gasp, imagining their home transformed into a glowing lantern in the dark woods. Practicality mingles with ritual. Hunters store bows and snowshoes near the door, ready for when the storm clears. Women mend clothing in the warmest part near the fire, their needles flashing in the flicker. The walls themselves creak softly as wind presses, then relaxes, as if the whole structure breathes with the storm. You lie back, staring at the dark, arching ribs above, and it feels like resting inside the skeleton of some giant protective beast. Archaeological evidence points to long use of wigwams across centuries, though the exact materials shifted with environment. In cedar-rich regions, bark was plentiful. In marshlands, cattail mats dominated. Along trade routes, even woven fabrics occasionally lined walls. That adaptability made them especially powerful. The idea was constant, but the execution flexible, molded by what the land gave. Picture the small domestic sounds now: the hiss of fat dripping into flames, the soft thud of snow sliding from the roof, the murmur of lullabies sung in languages that carried across generations. The storm outside is relentless, but inside this modest dome, you feel the pulse of survival, not through walls of stone or earth, but through a graceful curve of wood and bark. And here's something unexpected. In some regions, families would build multiple wigwams clustered together, each serving a different function: one for sleeping, one for cooking, one for storage. When blizzards struck, narrow paths were dug through the snow connecting them. Imagine crawling through a tunnel of white from one glowing dome to another, laughter echoing faintly as you push aside a flap and enter a space thick with the smell of stew. Even in the deepest snow, life continued with rhythm and variety. You let yourself sink into the wigwam's warmth. The blizzard has not stopped, it never really stops, but here its roar is softened, turned into background noise. You can close your eyes, breathe in the scent of cedar, and feel the shelter curve around you like a hand. It is not grandeur that saves you here, not immovable stone or towering walls. It is flexibility, cleverness, and a dome that turns snow into a harmless cloak. The wigwam curves gently around you, its bark and mats whispering under the pressure of drifting snow. Yet even within this shelter, the cold still claws at your skin, gnaws at your bones. The fire flickers but struggles, smoke curling sluggishly through the vent. You realize that walls alone are never enough. If you truly want to endure the storm, you must wrap yourself in another skin, a shield you carry wherever you go. For native peoples across the plains and forests, that shield was the buffalo hide, stitched and layered until it became as much a home as any lodge. Accounts from explorers and traders leave no doubt. Buffalo hides were the lifeblood of winter survival. A single bull could provide a covering large enough to drape across a lodge, but more often hides were stitched together 10, 20, even more until the tipi became a fortress against sleet and gale. Soft on the inside, tough on the outside, the hides shed water, blocked wind, and muffled the bitter sound of snow clawing at the walls. The storm might rage, but behind those sewn skins warmth pooled and lingered. You might smile to learn that the same hides often served double duty. During the day, hunters wrapped themselves in them as robes, the heavy fur turned inward. At night, those same coverings could be lashed tighter over a lodge, creating layers like armor. Imagine a tipi covered first with one set of hides, then again with another, until the structure resembled a massive cocoon of fur and leather. Each stitch was a line of defense, each seam a lifeline. Scholars continue to disagree about the exact waterproofing methods used. Some say hides were treated with brain tan mixtures and smoke, which sealed the pores and made them more resistant to moisture. Others argue that careful layering and constant maintenance mattered more than any chemical treatment. The truth may never be fully agreed upon, but the outcome was undeniable. Hides turned fragile poles into storm-ready shelters. Picture yourself now, pulling a buffalo robe across your shoulders. The fur is coarse but dense, brushing your cheek with surprising warmth. Snowflakes melt instantly on contact, sinking into the fibers instead of your skin. The weight grounds you, presses you toward the earth, reminding you that survival sometimes comes not from lightness or speed, but from heaviness, from layers piled until the storm cannot reach your flesh. Inside a lodge, hides hung not only as outer coverings, but also as inner liners. Step across the threshold, and you might find a second wall stitched from skins, hanging like curtains around the interior. The space between the two layers trapped air, just as snowbanks did, creating insulation. You can almost hear the muffled hush inside. Wind roars outside, but within the double walls, voices soften, fire crackles gently, and children's laughter drifts without being stolen by drafts. Oddly enough, some families painted their hides with patterns, thunderbirds, handprints, geometric symbols. To an outsider, these may have seemed like decoration. To those inside, the designs were guardians, stories, prayers, stitched into the very skin of the shelter. Imagine dozing off beneath a painted circle of sun or moon, the blizzard outside screaming, while above you the designs whisper silently of protection. The texture of these hides tells its own story. Run your hand over one in your imagination. On the outside, stiff and weathered, scarred with old marks. On the inside, soft and pliant, brushed into comfort. The contrast mirrors survival itself. The world beyond is harsh and unyielding, but inside, a gentleness endures, preserved by the careful work of human hands. Some historical accounts describe winter nights when every buffalo hide in camp was put to use. Spare coverings were stretched across doors, doubled on roof flaps, or even laid directly on the snow as makeshift flooring. Families understood that every square foot mattered. Even the smallest patch could mean the difference between a draft and a warm pocket of air. The storm might find gaps, but it would never find surrender. Archaeologists uncovering remnants of these shelters often find bone awls and needles nearby, silent evidence of the constant sewing required. The act of mending was as critical as hunting itself. One torn seam could unravel a family's warmth. You can imagine women bent over hides, fingers numb but determined, pulling sinew thread through tough leather while wind rattled outside. Each stitch became an act of defiance, each repair a refusal to yield to winter's cruelty. The debate still stirs in academic circles about just how effective buffalo hides were compared to the wooden planks or log walls favored by settlers. Some insist hides were superior, their flexibility preventing collapse under snow loads. Others claim log cabins ultimately trapped more heat. Yet those settlers often froze when storms breached their rigid structures, while native communities adapted and endured. Perhaps the question isn't which was better, but which reflected a deeper understanding of living with the land rather than against it. You draw your hide robe tighter in your mind. The smell is musky, earthy, tinged with smoke. It reminds you that the buffalo itself once stood against these very storms, shaggy and unbothered as snow caked its back. In a way, the animal continues to shield you even in death, lending you its strength across the barrier between life and survival. Inside the lodge, children curl into buffalo robes, disappearing completely under the folds. Their giggles turn into snores as they drift into sleep. Elders pull the edges tighter around their knees, rocking gently as they murmur stories. The hides creak faintly as they shift, but they do not fail. Outside, the storm throws itself against the camp with fury. Inside, buffalo hides transform fury into muffled whispers, turning death into dreams. And so you realize, survival is not always about building something immovable. Sometimes it is about borrowing strength from another creature, another life. In the buffalo hide, you carry both shield and memory. Wrapped within it, you are no longer alone against the blizzard. You are part of a larger body, one that once thundered across the plains and now guards you in stillness. The buffalo hides wrap tightly around you, but storms never tire. Hours drag into days, and there comes a point when no covering feels enough. You think of people caught far from camp, hunters stranded in sudden whiteouts, or families whose lodges have collapsed under the weight of snow. What then? When the world above turns hostile, sometimes the only answer is to go below. That is when you remember the underground shelters, the dugouts, pits, and burrowed havens that turned frozen plains into secret caves of survival. Early accounts from traders and explorers describe how certain plains and plateau communities carved depressions into the earth, roofed them with poles, brush, and hides, then heaped soil on top until the shelter became almost invisible under drifting snow. To the casual eye, it might look like nothing more than a mound in the landscape, but inside, the temperature shifted dramatically. Earth does not freeze as quickly as air. Even in midwinter, the ground a few feet down stays steady, insulating those who dig into it. One striking example comes from the Hidatsa and Mandan, whose permanent earth lodges inspired more temporary variations. Travelers recorded winter hunting camps where smaller, hastily dug structures offered quick refuge from storms. These shelters were not built to last a lifetime, sometimes only for a night or two, but they carried the same principle: use the earth as armor. You can imagine weary hunters stumbling across an open plain, spotting a mound half buried in snow, crawling down into its dark entrance, and finding inside a pocket of stillness, smoke curling faintly upward from a low fire. There's an intriguing detail often overlooked. Many of these pit shelters were lined with grasses, reeds, or brush before hides were laid down. That lining wasn't just padding, it was a barrier against moisture, keeping the damp earth from stealing heat. The smell would have been rich, almost sweet, the scent of dried summer fields mingling with smoke. Lying there, you would know you had turned the memory of warmer seasons into literal insulation. Researchers continue to puzzle over how widespread these underground shelters were. Some argue they were rare improvisations used only during emergencies. Others insist they formed an essential part of winter strategy, especially in regions with little timber. Archaeological digs uncover depressions in old campsites that might once have been storm shelters, but snow and soil erase evidence quickly, leaving the debate unresolved. That mystery itself feels fitting. Survival often leaves few traces behind. Now picture the experience of entering one. You lower yourself through a narrow entrance, ducking beneath a roof of brush and poles. Instantly, the shrieking wind vanishes. The silence is heavy, pressing against your ears. The floor is uneven but warmer than the frozen ground outside. Smoke curls lazily through a small vent hole, its warmth clinging to the walls before slipping into the storm above. You sit cross-legged on the packed floor, pulling a robe tighter around your shoulders, and you realize that while the blizzard continues its rampage, down here you are beyond its reach. There's a strange comfort in such close quarters. The ceiling hangs low, forcing everyone to stoop. Shadows dance across faces, turning every expression into a flicker of light and dark. Conversation softens, laughter comes in whispers, and the small space feels both confining and protective. Children may find it frightening at first, so little light, so little space, but then a story begins. A drumbeat echoes softly against the earth, and suddenly the underground chamber transforms from trap to sanctuary. Oddly enough, some communities even used these pits for social rituals when storms lasted too long. A blizzard might keep hunters indoors for days, so songs, games, and storytelling filled the time. Picture a child tracing shapes in the dirt floor with a stick, while an elder hums a tune that seems to blend with the moan of wind above. The storm becomes less enemy, more backdrop. You reach out in your imagination and touch the walls. They are cool, slightly damp, but steady. The earth presses close, reminding you that you are inside something older and stronger than any storm. You might feel like a mole or a bear in hibernation, but that image isn't far from the truth. Survival sometimes means imitating the animals that know best how to wait out the cold. Accounts from oral histories suggest that families sometimes dug connecting tunnels between multiple shelters, allowing small groups to move between them without exposure. Imagine crawling through a dark earthen passage, snow muffled above, a torch flickering ahead. You emerge into another chamber where a cousin or neighbor waits, smiling in relief. In the midst of the storm, such hidden networks turned isolation into community. Archaeological evidence points to fire pits lined with stone within some of these dugouts, suggesting that heat was carefully managed. Stones were heated in flames, then pushed against walls or tucked under bedding to radiate warmth long after the fire died down. You can feel it even now, the heat seeping slowly into your body as you lie against the floor, steady, enduring, a warmth that belongs not to flame but to the earth itself. Debate lingers among historians about whether these underground shelters were planned in advance or dug only in desperation. Some see them as deliberate seasonal strategies, while others argue they were emergency burrows carved in panic. Either way, the ingenuity is undeniable. When the world above tried to erase them, people quite literally went beneath it. You close your eyes, listening. Outside, snow hammers the surface, piling higher. But the sound is muted, softened, as though you are wrapped in a blanket of soil and frost. The storm is still there, but its teeth can't reach you. In this chamber, you understand something profound. Sometimes survival means not fighting the storm, not bending against it, but vanishing entirely until it passes. You settle deeper into the earth's embrace. Your breath fogs the dim air, mingling with the smoke. Somewhere, a child sighs in sleep. Someone stirs the embers, sending sparks into the dark. And you realize that tonight the blizzard howls in vain. You are hidden, tucked away, alive beneath the frozen skin of the world. The underground chamber holds a womb of earth and smoke, but eventually you must crawl back into the storm. Snow blinds you, wind slashes, and the world feels more like an ocean than a plain white waves crashing, white spray cutting your skin raw. As you stumble, you notice something curious. The river nearby has frozen, its banks piled with jagged shards of ice, its surface locked in solid silence. At first glance, it seems like nothing more than another hazard, a slippery trap waiting to break beneath your feet. But to native peoples braving these blizzards, rivers and their ice carried hidden value. Waterways became natural fortifications, barriers against the wind, and even building blocks for survival. It is well documented in explorers' journals that winter camps were often pitched along rivers. The banks rose as natural windbreaks, shielding tipis or wigwams from direct gusts. Snow piled against those banks, forming additional walls, so that a lodge pitched near the frozen water felt like it crouched within a fortress. Imagine bedding down with your back to an ice-crusted slope, knowing that half the storm's fury would shatter against that wall before it ever reached your shelter. One curious practice involved cutting blocks of river ice and stacking them as temporary barriers. These weren't grand igloos, but simple walls erected to shield fires or lean-tos. Travelers describe seeing hunters crouched behind shimmering barricades of ice, fires flickering faintly against them, the whole scene glowing like glass lanterns in the dark. Oddly enough, those ice walls reflected heat inward, bouncing the fire's glow back at the huddled figures, doubling its effectiveness. In the middle of a blizzard, surrounded by roaring darkness, such shimmering walls must have looked almost magical. Experts still debate just how widespread these techniques were. Some argue that the use of ice blocks for shelter was rare, improvised by only a handful of groups when conditions allowed. Others point to oral traditions and archaeological hints, stone scrapers near frozen rivers, markings in old banks that suggest ice played a far larger role than written accounts admit. The argument remains unresolved, but it highlights a truth. Survival often leaves few footprints, especially when your building material melts come spring. Imagine walking now along the riverbank. The ice creaks beneath your boots, groaning like an old tree. You chip at the edge with a stone, pry loose a block, and heave it upright. Its surface glitters with trapped bubbles, like stars caught in glass. You place it beside another, then another, until a crude wall rises. The wind hits it and slides aside, swirling around you instead of through you. For the first time all day, your face feels a hint of stillness. The soundscape here is unique. Above, the storm screams, but beside the ice wall, there's a strange quiet, as though the frozen barrier swallows the wind's sharpness. Your fire snaps, the flames mirrored in every block, multiplying into a dozen flickering suns. For a moment, the blizzard seems far away, its power muted by the shimmering barricade you've built with nothing but frozen water. Practical benefits aside, rivers carried symbolic weight as well. Many communities told stories of water spirits, guardians who demanded respect. Building shelters against riverbanks or with ice walls may have felt like aligning survival with those spirits. Imagine sitting by your fire, ice glimmering around you, and feeling not just protected but blessed, as though the river itself had folded around you to keep you alive. Oddly enough, frozen rivers also offered pathways. Hunters could drag sleds along their glassy surfaces, moving quickly even in heavy snow. A river was not just a source of water, but a road, a shield, and a partner in survival. Picture sled runners squealing faintly as they slide over ice, dogs panting, breath pluming like steam against the blizzard, and behind them, bundles of hides and food bound for camp. Even in its frozen silence, the river served. Archaeological evidence points to settlements clustered near waterways, where the combination of fish, fresh water, and natural shelter outweighed the risks of flooding come spring. In winter, those same rivers turned into guardians, their banks catching snow, their frozen bodies reflecting light. For families huddled in lodges nearby, the presence of a river meant a little less wind, a little more warmth, and a slightly better chance of waking alive. You crouch now against your ice wall, your fire hissing and spitting as flakes fall into it. Your face tingles with the reflected glow, your hands thaw slightly, and your shoulders drop in relief. The storm still howls, but you have bent the river to your will, turned water into armor. It is a strange, almost poetic twist. The same element that can drown you in summer now saves you in winter, if you know how to shape it. The debate among historians will continue, sifting scraps of evidence, piecing together fragments of memory. But in this moment, crouched behind ice, you don't care about scholarly arguments. You care only about the warmth spreading through your fingers, the shield at your back, and the knowledge that once again, human ingenuity has found a way to coax safety out of danger. You lean closer to the fire, watching its light dance across the shimmering wall. For a fleeting instant it feels as if you sit inside a crystal palace, delicate and glowing. Then the wind roars again, snapping you back to reality. The ice wall shudders, water drips from its edges, but it holds, and that is enough to keep you alive until dawn. The ice wall shimmers like a fragile miracle, yet deep inside you know it cannot last forever. The blizzard will outlive your makeshift barricade, the cold will seep back in, and the storm will keep hammering until dawn. What saves you, finally, is not only ice or hides or snowbanks, it is the fire at the center of it all. The hearth becomes more than survival gear. It becomes the sacred circle, the place where warmth gathers and spirit endures. Descriptions left behind by explorers and traders reveal that in many native communities, the hearth was the literal and symbolic heart of the lodge. Everything radiated outward from that fire. Sleeping benches, storage racks, entryways all arranged in relation to its glow. It is clear from records that people didn't just build shelters and then add a fire. They built shelters for the fire, designing every element around it. That spark was the axis on which survival spun. There's a remarkable detail in oral histories. The hearth wasn't merely functional, it was sacred. Flames were often treated as living presences, spirits that had to be fed, respected, and never abandoned. In some traditions, a small coal from a family fire was carried to the next camp, wrapped carefully to ensure continuity. Imagine walking across snow-choked plains, heart pounding, knowing that the tiny ember in your pouch carries not just warmth but identity, memory, and belonging. Scholars remain divided on how much ritual surrounded daily fires. Some argue that ceremonies were limited to seasonal events. Others believe that nearly every act placing wood, stirring embers, blowing smoke carried spiritual significance. What no one disputes is that the hearth bound families together. In a storm, that circle of flame was not just about cooking or heat. It was about anchoring human hearts when everything else seemed intent on erasing them. Picture yourself now, crouching near such a fire. Sparks leap into the smoky air, clinging briefly to the roof poles before vanishing. The hides above glow faintly orange, snow sliding down their outer surfaces. Around the fire, Faces gleam, eyes half closed, cheeks ruddy from heat. The sound of the storm is muted, distant, like surf behind stone. All you feel is the pulse of the flames, steady and alive. Curiously, fires in lodges were rarely huge. Enormous blazes would have filled the room with choking smoke. Instead, small, steady flames were preferred fires that glowed rather than roared. Families became masters of balancing fuel and air, coaxing just enough flame to cook, to warm, to light, but never to consume the shelter. It takes a delicate hand to keep that balance, and you can almost feel yourself learning it, leaning forward to nudge a coal, shifting wood just so, listening to the subtle change in the crackle. The smell is unforgettable. Smoke curls thick but not oppressive, mixing with the scent of meat roasting slowly on skewers. Fat drips into the fire, hissing as it strikes the coals. Herbs thrown in for cleansing sage, cedar, sweet grass release fragrances that cling to hides and clothing. You breathe deeply, the aroma sinking into your chest, replacing the icy air outside with a perfume of survival. Oddly enough, there are stories of children playing games with firelight, casting shadows on lodge walls, making figures dance in the glow. They laughed even as storms raged, their tiny hands transforming survival's seriousness into a moment of play. Think of that, while wind screamed beyond the walls. Shadows of deer, birds, or even blizzards themselves leapt across hides, controlled by little fingers. The fire, deadly if mistreated, became a toy in children's imaginations. Archaeological evidence points to hearths carefully maintained over years. Ash layers found in ancient lodge sites reveal generations of fires built in the same spot, each one feeding on the remnants of the last. Ash wasn't waste. It was often used to bank coals overnight, keeping them alive until morning. You can picture a parent burying glowing embers under ash before sleep, whispering a prayer that they would still glow come dawn. That act is both practical and spiritual, a trust placed in fire's patience. Experts debate whether these central fires provided enough heat alone or if heated stones were necessary supplements. Some argue that stones warmed in flames and tucked under furs were indispensable on the coldest nights. Others counter that well-built lodges, lined and sealed, trapped heat efficiently enough. The disagreement remains unresolved, but either way, the principle holds. Fire alone wasn't just flame, it was technology, psychology, spirituality, and comfort all in one. Imagine the circle now as you sit among them, elders leaning close, voices low, recounting tales of past winters when blizzards lasted weeks. Children lean against their parents, eyes heavy, comforted by the steady rhythm of firelight. The flames reflect in everyone's eyes, tiny suns burning within each person, as if the fire's spirit has divided itself into fragments and lodged inside their gazes. The storm outside may roar, but inside this circle the noise cannot dominate. What you hear instead is the pop of wood, the low hum of voices, the sigh of sleepers drifting off. The fire becomes a heartbeat that all others follow. When you stare into it, you realize that shelter is not just poles, hides, or snowbanks. Shelter is this glowing center, this circle of warmth where life gathers, holds hands, and refuses to vanish. You lean back, letting the heat soak into your skin, and smile faintly. The blizzard still rages, but here, in the sacred fire circle, you feel not hunted, not cornered, but protected. And for a moment, you even dare to believe that the storm itself might envy you, that while it thrashes and claws, you sit in quiet communion with something stronger: flame, family, and the steady rhythm of survival. The fire burns steadily, orange glow breathing against the hides. But warmth is never an individual victory. You soon realize that heat isn't just coaxed from flames or snow walls, it is drawn from the very bodies pressed close beside you. Survival in a blizzard is a collective act, an intimate reliance on others, where shared warmth becomes as important as any structure. Historical accounts describe families sleeping in tight clusters, bodies layered like logs stacked to catch and keep heat. Travelers who once stepped into winter lodges noted with surprise that people rarely slept apart. Instead, they curled in pairs or groups beneath robes of buffalo hide. Children nestled between adults, elders wrapped near the center. The logic was obvious. One body radiates little, but 10 together create a pocket of enduring heat. In a storm that threatened to strip life from every finger and toe, the human body became both vulnerable and powerful, a small furnace when joined to others. One unexpected detail comes from oral stories. In some communities, animals joined this nightly huddle. Dogs, essential companions for hunting, hauling, and protection, often crawled into the piles of fur with families. Their warmth, musky and steady, added another layer of life against the storm. Children sometimes drifted to sleep with a pup under one arm and a sibling under the other, both breathing in rhythm, both guarding one another against the night. Scholars continue to debate whether this communal closeness was purely practical or also cultural. Was it only about conserving heat, or was it also a way of reinforcing kinship bonds, of teaching children from birth that survival was never solitary? Some researchers argue the physical arrangement of beds in lodges mirrored social hierarchies, with elders or chiefs placed near the warmest spots. Others suggest warmth erased those hierarchies when frost threatened, everyone became equal beneath the hides. The disagreement lingers, but the effect was the same. Lives were saved through intimacy. Imagine yourself now, lying shoulder to shoulder with family. A child's breath warms your chest. An elder's back presses against yours. Fur covers you all, heavy, smelling of smoke and hide. At first it feels cramped, even suffocating, but as the minutes pass, a deep comfort spreads. The storm cannot chill you when so many bodies are radiating against one another. You become not separate figures but one great animal, curled against the cold, heartbeats overlapping like a shared drumbeat. The soundscape changes in such closeness. You hear not only the fire's crackle but the chorus of sleep-soft snores, sighs, the faint whimper of a dream. The storm still rattles the hides, but those inside are cocooned in sound as much as warmth. Every exhale becomes a contribution, every inhale a borrowing, an exchange that keeps everyone alive. Curiously, travelers sometimes misunderstood these practices, describing them in awkward or dismissive tones. They failed to grasp that the communal bed was not a lack of privacy, but a strategy honed by centuries of adaptation. In your imagination, you can correct their vision. See not chaos, but deliberate design, where every person's position in the sleeping cluster is chosen for maximum comfort and safety. Oddly enough, children sometimes turned this necessity into play. They whispered jokes beneath the hides, poking one another, daring each other to sneak bare toes into the cold air. Laughter rippled through the group, even as the storm raged outside. Warmth was survival, but it was also joy, a reminder that even in deadly weather, humor still flickered. Archaeological evidence hints at the importance of bedding. Excavations at old winter sites reveal layers of woven mats, fur remnants, and even traces of dried grasses, suggesting that families carefully prepared their sleeping areas. Bedding wasn't thrown together at random. It was crafted, layered, renewed, season after season. You can imagine the scent of dried grasses releasing faint summer aromas, mingling with smoke and fur, carrying the memory of warmth into the heart of winter. There is a striking philosophy in all this. You realize that warmth is not owned, it is shared. Your heat belongs to those beside you, and theirs to you. The blizzard outside tries to divide, to scatter, to isolate, but inside the lodge, people draw closer, fuse together. It is a quiet rebellion, a refusal to let the storm make them lonely. Picture the scene. A mother wakes in the night, tucking a sleeping child tighter under the robe. An elder stretches stiffly, sighs, and rolls closer to the fire. A hunter's dog paws at the ground, then curls into a ball against its master's legs. Each movement disturbs the group, yet also restores balance, shifting warmth to where it is needed most. The fire hisses softly, as if approving the choreography of survival. Some researchers remark that this closeness might have prevented illness as much as it spread it. Warmth preserved circulation, warded off frostbite, allowed recovery from exhaustion. Yet proximity also risked passing fevers or coughs. Still, when faced with the choice of freezing apart or risking sickness together, the answer was clear. You can sense that decision even now. Life first, health second, privacy last. You let yourself sink into the warmth of this imagined huddle. Your breathing slows to match those around you. You are no longer a solitary figure shivering in snow, but part of a circle of heat. The storm may continue its assault, but inside this tight knot of bodies, the world feels bearable, even gentle. You drift towards sleep, reminded that the human body, fragile alone, becomes formidable when joined with others. The storm outside does not forgive, but within the lodge you feel bodies pressed close, sharing warmth in a silent pact. And then, you notice other bodies, stirring ones covered not in robes but in fur and paws. Dogs shuffle near the fire, shaking off snowflakes that cling stubbornly to their coats. Ponies shift just outside the flap, their breaths rising in clouds that freeze instantly in the bitter air. In many native camps, survival wasn't just a human effort. Animals, too, joined the circle of warmth, partners as vital as any stone, hide, or firebrand. Historical records confirm that dogs were more than companions. They pulled travois loaded with hides, hunted game, guarded camps, but in winter storms, they were heaters with beating hearts. Families often let them sleep indoors, curled at the edges of bedding piles. Their dense fur radiated warmth like small living fires. You can almost hear it now, the soft thump of a tail, the heavy sigh of a tired dog curling against a child, the faint crackle as their body heat melts tiny patches of frost. One curious observation from traders' journals describes how ponies were sometimes led into makeshift corrals built against lodges during blizzards. Their bulk broke the wind, creating calmer air where people might move between shelters. Imagine peeking through the lodge flap to see ponies huddled nose to tail, manes crusted with ice, yet still forming a barrier that kept the storm's worst claws at bay. Their bodies became walls as much as the hides and poles around you. Researchers still debate the extent to which animals were regularly housed indoors. Some accounts insist dogs were frequent guests, while larger animals were kept outside. Others suggest that in particularly savage blizzards, even ponies might be brought into larger structures for safety. The truth likely shifted with tribe, season, and circumstance. What is certain is that animals were not separate from survival. They were woven into it, as essential as fire or food. Picture the scene inside the lodge more vividly. Children wrap arms around shaggy pups, giggling as the animals squirm before settling into warmth. An elder strokes a dog's fur absent-mindedly while speaking, hand moving rhythmically as if reassuring both human and beast. A pony, tied just outside, snorts into the storm, its body steaming faintly against the snow. You can feel the rhythm of many lives intertwined, the storm raging around a nucleus of warmth and heartbeat. Oddly enough, dogs sometimes served as early warning systems. Their ears twitched at shifts in the wind, their growls hinted at collapsing snow, their pacing foretold dangers unseen by human eyes. Families trusted these signals. When a dog whined at the lodge wall, people knew the storm's fury was changing, that perhaps more snow was piling on the roof than before. In a way, animals became barometers of survival. There's a scent in this shared space: fur, smoke, hides, and the faint musk of animals mingling with the human press. Some might wrinkle their noses, but for those inside, the smell was not unpleasant. It meant life. It meant the circle was complete. You take a deep breath in your imagination, and the musk becomes reassurance proof that you are not alone in this long war against the cold. Archaeological hints reinforce this closeness. Excavations at ancient campsites have revealed dog bones not only buried ceremonially, but found intermingled with household debris, suggesting their constant presence in daily life. Some researchers speculate that paw prints pressed into the clay floors of old lodges may have been left by animals sharing those very spaces during winters. These faint marks whisper across centuries, telling you that when storms struck, humans and animals sheltered together. Imagine now lying against the fur of a large dog, your face buried in its side. Its body is warm, heart beating steady, breath fogging the air in rhythm with yours. Around you, the lodge hums with life children asleep, adults murmuring, fire whispering, ponies stamping outside. The storm still screams, but within this tangle of human and animal warmth, you feel something close to peace. An elder might tell a story in this moment, weaving animals into myth as much as memory. Perhaps he recalls how wolves taught humans to hunt, or how horses carried whole nations to survival. Children, stroking their pets, listen wide-eyed, seeing their companions not as animals alone but as kin. It is a lesson embedded in warmth. Survival belongs not to one species, but to many working together. Scholars puzzle over whether this integration of animals blurred the boundary between domestic and wild. Were dogs, family, tools, spirits? The answer seems to be yes all at once. That ambiguity troubles tidy definitions, but for those huddled in a lodge during a blizzard, categories mattered less than comfort. What mattered was that the dog's fur was warm, the pony's bulk broke the wind, the circle of survival widened to include every breathing creature. You reach out, in imagination, to scratch behind a dog's ear. It leans into your hand, sighs, and presses closer. You feel the storm beyond the wall, but inside you hear only heartbeats, human and animal together. For a moment, it no longer feels like enduring a blizzard. It feels like sharing a night with family, some on 2 legs, some on 4. The dogs snore, the ponies shift, and the fire sighs in the center of the lodge. But you, restless, step outside in your imagination for a moment. The cold slaps your face instantly, a punishment for leaving the circle of warmth. You try to grip your knife or hatchet, but the metal burns like ice. The truth dawns with startling clarity. Tools themselves can betray you in the storm. Blizzards freeze not only flesh but also the very implements meant to keep you alive. Accounts from fur traders and native oral histories alike describe this harsh reality. Blades grew brittle, bows lost their spring, rawhide lashings stiffened until they cracked. A hunter might draw his knife only to find the handle frozen solid, fingers refusing to bend. The tools that normally extended human strength became useless or worse, dangerous when winter tightened its grip. It is well recorded that survival meant not only having tools, but knowing how to coax them into working even when they seemed frozen against you. One curious image stays with you: hunters warming blades by thrusting them briefly into embers, then wiping them clean before cutting frozen meat. The smell of scorched iron and fat mingled, sharp and metallic, filling the lodge. The danger was always there: heat a tool too much, and it warped or snapped. But without warmth, steel and sinew became rigid, as if the storm had stolen their spirit. Experts continue to debate whether native toolkits shifted dramatically in design specifically for winter. Some argue that bone and antler implements endured the cold better than metal, which could crack or freeze to skin. Others counter that once European trade introduced iron, its versatility outweighed its fragility. The question lingers, but the lesson remains: no tool was safe from the blizzard's grip. Imagine yourself kneeling over a carcass in waist-deep snow, your knife stuck fast to your glove when you try to pull it free. You fumble, breath clouding in frantic bursts, before realizing you must warm both hand and blade together under your arm before continuing. The storm doesn't pause for you. Every wasted second drains more heat from your body. Oddly enough, some oral traditions tell of hunters singing softly to their bows, murmuring encouragement, as if coaxing a stubborn companion back to life. Was this superstition? Or recognition that in such conditions, tools felt almost alive, partners that needed tending and persuading? You can picture a man crouched over his bow, rubbing the sinew string gently, humming against the wind as though warming not just the fibre but the spirit bound within it. The soundscape of frozen tools is eerie. Wood creaks sharply, leather straps snap like brittle twigs, iron clinks against stone with a dull, muted ring. Each sound is a warning. Something is weakening. Something might fail. Hunters listened as much as they watched. A wrong noise could mean a broken spear at the worst possible moment. Archaeological finds reveal bone awls, antler chisels, and stone scrapers that show wear patterns suggesting winter use. Unlike metal, these organic tools flex slightly, enduring freezes that shattered brittle iron. Perhaps you can feel one in your hand now, a bone scraper, warm against your palm even in the cold, shaped smooth by years of work. Its edge bites cleanly into frozen hide where steel would fail. It reminds you that survival wasn't always about adopting the newest technology. Sometimes, the old ways endured because they fit the climate better. Inside the lodge, you return to the fire, trying to thaw your knife beside the flames. Children watch, fascinated, as frost melts and droplets hiss away. To them, it must look like magic, a dead thing revived by firelight. You glance at their faces and realize that such small demonstrations were lessons. Every moment around the hearth doubled as education. How to soften rawhide, how to flex a bowstring, how to keep sinew supple by rubbing it with fat. Knowledge passed in sparks and steam, whispered between generations while the storm rattled outside. There's humor in these struggles too. Imagine a young hunter trying to free a hatchet stuck fast to a log, only to fall backward into the snow while the older men chuckle knowingly. Or a child licking a frozen knife blade in foolish curiosity, yelping as their tongue sticks a sharp, painful lesson that will be retold in laughter for years. Even in danger, life found comedy. The smell of thawing tools fills the lodge, now burnt leather, heated resin, the acrid tang of singed sinew. It isn't pleasant, but it is familiar, part of the cycle of winter. You realize that survival isn't only about materials, it is about patience. Every tool requires care, every strap must be checked, every edge sharpened, despite the cold's attempts to blunt it. Researchers still argue about how much time winter maintenance consumed. Some claim hunters spent as much as half their days tending to equipment, while others believe the rhythm was more fluid, woven into storytelling, cooking, and resting. What is certain is that no one could afford to neglect it. Tools were extensions of hands, and in the blizzard, every extension had to be coddled like a child. You stretch your hands toward the fire again, knife warm now, blade gleaming faintly in the light. The storm continues to batter the lodge, but you feel a flicker of pride. You've reclaimed control over the object meant to keep you alive. Tomorrow, it may freeze again. Tomorrow, you may curse its stiffness and weakness. But tonight, in this glow, you and your tools breathe together, alive against the storm. Your knife gleams again, revived by firelight. Yet another challenge waits in the air above you. Smoke thickens, curling in lazy spirals until your eyes sting and your throat scratches. You cough, wave your hand, and glance upward at the hole in the roof, the vent that lets fire breathe. But tonight, the blizzard complicates even that. Snow swirls in, flakes hissing as they strike the flames, while smoke struggles to escape. The smoke hole becomes a dilemma, a battle between lungs and warmth, breath and storm. Accounts from early observers make it clear every lodge, tipi, or wigwam balanced around a vent, too wide, and the snow poured in, too narrow, and smoke gathered until everyone's eyes watered and babies wheezed. It is well documented that families adjusted this opening constantly, shifting flaps, lifting poles, or even standing guard with long sticks to poke snow free. The shelter was never static, it was a living thing, needing constant tending to breathe. One curious practice stands out. Some communities hung thin hides or mats across the smoke hole, leaving just enough space for fumes to escape while keeping snow at bay. These acted like filters, glowing faintly orange as firelight shone through them. Imagine lying beneath such a screen, watching sparks drift upward, knowing that if you didn't tend the hole, your own fire might choke you before the storm ever could. Scholars remain divided on just how efficient these smoke holes were. Some argue that the designs were nearly perfect, honed across generations to create a natural draft that pulled smoke upward while heat stayed low. Others insist that life inside was always smoky, eyes perpetually stinging, lungs filled with haze. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, a system clever enough to keep families alive, yet imperfect enough that smoke became part of everyday air. Picture yourself inside the lodge now. The fire crackles, children huddle under hides, dogs shift restlessly. Above you, smoke thickens, then clears, then thickens again as wind direction shifts. A sudden gust forces the vent flap wide open, snowflakes tumble in, and the fire sputters, sparks leaping dangerously. You scramble, tugging the flap closed again, coughing as smoke pours back into the space. Your eyes water, but the alternative, snuffing out the fire entirely, is worse. Survival means enduring the haze. Oddly enough, smoke carried benefits too. It cured meat hanging from poles above the flames, preserving venison or bison strips for months. It drove away insects in warmer seasons, though in the blizzard you might only imagine that function. And, perhaps most importantly, it became a sensory marker of home. Families traveling could smell a familiar mix of burning fuel and hides long before they reached camp, guiding them back through snow. You can almost smell it now. Acrid, sharp, earthy, a perfume of survival that clings to every robe and braid. Children sometimes played in this haze, giggling as they tried to trace shapes with their fingers through the smoke. For them, the blur was not misery but mystery, a world half hidden, transformed into a game. Parents let them play, partly to distract from hunger or cold, partly because what else could one do? You smile at the thought storm shrieking outside, children making smoky ghosts above the fire, laughter ringing against coughing. Archaeological finds lend evidence to this smoky life. Soot stains cling stubbornly to ancient poles and stones, traces that tell researchers just how constant the fires burned. Some excavations reveal charred layers of roof coverings replaced again and again, each one bearing scars of smoke and sparks. Those dark marks are not flaws but testimonies, whispers that fire truly lived here. The debate among historians continues. Did constant smoke shorten lifespans, scar lungs, weaken families over time? Or did the protective benefits outweigh the costs? There's no single answer, but one can imagine elders coughing, eyes clouded, yet still insisting on feeding the fire. Without it, there was no survival. With it, even if imperfect, there was life. Now lean back in your imagination, gazing upward through the smoke hole. Snow glimmers faintly beyond, white against black sky. The storm roars, but through that small vent you glimpse stars peaking when clouds shift, pinpoints of quiet eternity beyond the blizzard's fury. For a moment, the smoke hole becomes more than engineering. It is a window, a fragile reminder that there is still a world beyond the storm, still a sky waiting when winter passes. You breathe in, cough once, and settle back into your furs. The smoke is thick, but you accept it. Your lungs ache, your eyes burn, but the fire glows steady, and the storm still cannot claim you. That balance between choking haze and freezing air is the razor's edge of survival. And as you drift toward uneasy sleep, you realize that even imperfection can be enough to carry life through a deadly night. Your eyes sting from the smoke, the snow keeps piling against the walls, and you realize again that no family could endure these trials alone. Knowledge was the one commodity that kept entire nations alive, and in winter, shelter wisdom was as valuable as food or weapons. Tribes learned from one another, traded techniques, borrowed designs, and adapted them into their own landscapes. Blizzards forced cooperation, and in that exchange of survival secrets, cultures wove invisible threads across vast distances. Written accounts from French and British traders in the 1600s and 1700s describe this exchange vividly. They noted how northern woodland peoples, accustomed to bark wigwams, observed plains hunters erecting conical tipis and adapted some of those features, adding inner linings, adjusting smoke flaps. Likewise, plains nations sometimes borrowed bark panel tricks when hides were scarce. It is recorded clearly that the blizzard did not respect cultural boundaries, and so wisdom crossed them as well. One remarkable detail shines from oral tradition. Stories tell of gatherings where different groups, temporarily united for trade, swapped not only corn and hides, but also shelter strategies. Around communal fires, people demonstrated knotting techniques, showed how to bank snow properly, or shared tips for curing hides so they wouldn't stiffen in freezing rain. Imagine that scene, an improvised university of survival, with the blizzard itself as the stern professor, demanding everyone take notes. Experts disagree on just how formal these exchanges were. Some scholars insist they were casual, picked up through observation and necessity. Others argue they were deliberate, ritualized, even ceremonial, with younger members tasked to memorize and practice what outsiders taught. Whatever the mechanism, the outcome was the same. Storms bred collaboration, not isolation. Picture yourself in such a gathering. Outside, snow lashes the camp. Inside a massive earth lodge, dozens of visitors from neighboring bands huddle together. Smoke rises. Conversations murmur in multiple languages. A Lakota elder gestures with his hands, explaining how Tipi linings can create a warm air pocket. Across the fire, an Anishinaabe woman demonstrates how to weave cattail mats tight enough to block wind. You watch as young people imitate the motions, fumbling at first, then smiling when the technique clicks. The fire pops. Dogs yawn at the edges, and knowledge itself glows like another kind of flame. Curiously, these gatherings often carried elements of trade far beyond shelter. Alongside survival tips came songs, marriages, spiritual practices. In the middle of a storm, new alliances were forged, and the very blizzards meant to kill instead seeded future strength. You can almost hear the echoes, songs sung in unfamiliar cadences, laughter bubbling through the smoky air. The storm's howl kept outside by not only hides and snowbanks, but also by human connection. There's a sensory richness to such exchanges. The smell of unfamiliar foods bubbling in shared pots, perhaps maize from one group, dried fish from another. The texture of woven mats passed from hand to hand, their rough reeds scratching eager fingers. The crackle of different tongues, each carrying words for snow, storm, shelter. For a moment, the lodge becomes not just a refuge, but a library of living wisdom. Oddly enough, even competition sometimes spurred innovation. A young hunter from one band might boast that his people's shelters never collapsed, prompting another to counter with their own superior technique. Pride sharpened skills. What began as rivalry often ended in admiration, as each realized the other's designs had merit. In that sense, the storm created a silent contest. Whose people could outwit the blizzard most cleverly? And yet, beneath that contest was mutual respect, a recognition that survival knowledge belonged to everyone who faced the same deadly sky. Archaeological evidence offers faint proof of these exchanges. Similar construction techniques appear in regions hundreds of miles apart, too far for coincidence. Post holes, hearth remains, mat impressions, they speak of ideas carried by footsteps across snowy plains and forests. You picture someone trudging home after such a gathering, head filled with images of new knots, new patterns, eager to try them before the next storm. Historians still puzzle over whether these exchanges altered the pace of cultural change, accelerating adaptations to new climates or materials. Did knowledge sharing make communities more resilient, or did it sometimes dilute unique traditions? The debate continues in libraries and lecture halls, but in your imagination, the answer is simpler. In a blizzard, wisdom is never wasted. If a trick saves lives, it belongs to all. You lean closer to the communal fire now. Strangers share stories that feel instantly familiar. Laughter rises even as wind slams the lodge walls, and children weave through the crowd chasing dogs. You realize that what keeps the storm at bay isn't just snowbanks, hides, or smoke holes, it's the willingness of people to share what they know. The blizzard has no loyalty, but humans can. And in that loyalty, warmth multiplies. The fire flares. Someone passes you a woven mat, and you run your fingers across its ridges. It feels sturdy, simple, yet ingenious. You imagine taking it home, weaving your own, teaching your children. In that moment, you understand the quiet miracle of survival, not only outlasting storms, but outsmarting them together. The gathering dissolves, the laughter fades, and once again you find yourself inside a smaller shelter, fur pulled to your chin, the blizzard's teeth rattling the walls. You think back on all the lessons shared: snowbanks, earth walls, tipis, wigwams, but realize something else is at work here. Shelters are not just made of poles and hides, they are made of clothing too, garments layered carefully until the body itself becomes a portable lodge. In the heart of a storm, your shirt, leggings, and robe are as vital as any timber frame. It is well attested in historical records that native peoples of the plains, woodlands, and Arctic edge crafted winter clothing with astonishing precision. Bison hides were tanned into thick robes, fur side turned inward. Deer and elk skins were layered as leggings and shirts, stitched with sinew threads that flexed rather than snapped in the cold. In forested regions, woven grasses or cattail mats sometimes lined garments, adding an extra layer of insulation. Clothing wasn't simply adornment, it was architecture worn on the skin. One curious detail comes from accounts of fur traders who marveled at moccasins stuffed with dried grasses. The grass wasn't for comfort alone. It wicked away moisture, keeping feet dry, and it could be replaced daily to maintain warmth. Imagine pulling off your moccasins after a long trek, shaking out frosty grasses, and sliding in fresh ones that still smell faintly of summer fields. The practice turned every step into a reminder that ingenuity lives in small details. Debate persists among scholars over how clothing styles shifted with the arrival of trade goods. Did wool blankets and metal needles enhance winter clothing, or did they disrupt older, more efficient systems? Some argue European fabrics layered poorly, trapping dampness. Others suggest they added versatility and speed. The truth is tangled, but the principle shines. Clothing was never static. It evolved, adapted, adjusted to every storm. Now imagine dressing yourself for the blizzard. First, leggings of softened deer hide, cinched tight at the ankles. Then a shirt of elk skin, heavy but flexible. Over that, a buffalo robe, fur brushed thick, smelling faintly of smoke. A belt cinches it all close, keeping drafts from sneaking in. On your feet, moccasins lined with grasses, tied snug. Around your head, a hood of fur drawn forward until only your eyes peek out. You stand heavier now, slower, but also transformed a walking lodge of layered defenses. Oddly enough, some communities designed double robes, two hides stitched fur to fur, creating an interior pocket of air. These robes, though cumbersome, trapped heat so well that a person could sleep outside the lodge entirely, snow falling over them, and still wake alive. Oral tales describe hunters caught far from camp, wrapping in such robes and letting themselves be buried by snow, using its weight as additional insulation. You can almost feel the suffocating heaviness, and yet the strange security it brings. The sounds of winter clothing fill your ears as you shift. Leather creaks, sinew threads snap faintly, grasses rustle within moccasins. Each sound is both reassuring and precarious, a reminder that your garments are alive with tension, and that every stitch matters. One broken seam could mean frost gnawing at your side before morning. Archaeological findings support this picture. Needles made of bone, awls carved from antler, and scraps of smoked hide appear in winter camp layers. These tools tell of constant repair. Clothing wasn't permanent, it was maintained endlessly. Around the fire, women stitched under dim light, hands moving quickly, patching a hole before the storm found it. You can imagine the smell of hide warmed by flame, the sharp tug of sinew thread through leather, the quiet murmur of conversation over the hum of wind outside. Children learned clothing lore early. They were taught not only how to dress, but why. Wrap your leggings before you tie your moccasins. Keep your robe closed against the wind. Never let your hood fall back. Such sayings became mantras, repeated until they were reflexes. Because in a blizzard, hesitation killed. Survival was a habit worn daily. One curious note from missionary writings describes their surprise at how little exposed skin was left visible. Hands tucked under robes, faces hidden beneath hoods, even mouths covered when the wind grew harsh. To outsiders it seemed strange, even antisocial. But to those within, it was wisdom. The less skin exposed, the less heat lost, the longer life endured. You can almost feel the muffled silence as everyone shuffles wrapped in fur, voices hidden, yet hearts steady beneath the layers. And there's humor too. Children teased each other about vanishing beneath their robes, pretending to be bison or bears, roaring until parents laughed. Even in freezing storms, imagination softened the edge of hardship. You picture the scene: snow hammering outside, while inside, a child waddles clumsily in oversized leggings, making the whole lodge chuckle despite the cold. Researchers note that clothing often carried designs, beaded edges, quilled patterns, painted symbols that spoke of identity. Even in the harshest storm, beauty wasn't abandoned. Imagine trudging through snow in leggings stitched with bright porcupine quills, each step a defiance of the blizzard, a reminder that survival and dignity could walk together. As you pull your robe tighter in your imagination, the storm claws again, but its bite feels weaker. You realize that your body is no longer just flesh. It is a structure of leather, fur, grass, sinew, each layer a wall against the cold. You are a shelter walking, breathing, moving through the snow. The lodge protects the family, but the clothing protects the self. Both are needed. Both are sacred. Both transform fragile skin into endurance. You glance at your hands, swaddled in fur mittens stitched with sinew. You flex them slowly, and for the first time, you believe you might outlast the storm. Your robe is heavy, your mittens thick, but the blizzard still presses in, relentless. You huddle near the fire, body wrapped and layered, yet another sense begins to sharpen. The storm has a voice. It moans against the walls, shrieks through gaps, whispers through smoke holes. Survival here is not only about sight or touch, it is about listening. The sounds of a blizzard become guides, warning of collapse, hinting at changes, whispering secrets to those who know how to hear them. It is recorded in both oral tradition and explorer journals that people learn to read the language of storms. A low, steady roar meant drifting snow was building weight against lodge walls. A sharp whistling note meant a seam in the hide had loosened, and wind was slicing through. A muffled creak above warned that the roof bore too much snow, poles groaning in protest. Families trained their ears as carefully as hunters trained their eyes. Shelter was not a silent refuge, it was an instrument, and storms played it mercilessly. One curious practice noted by ethnographers is how children were taught storm listening as a game. Elders would hush them during a blizzard and say, "What does the wind tell you?" Children guessed, "Snow on the roof, flap loose, ponies restless outside." Correct answers brought smiles, wrong ones brought gentle correction. Imagine being a child lying awake, straining to separate each note of the storm, learning to hear survival in every gust. Researchers still argue about how precise these auditory skills were. Some suggest it was instinctive, more art than science. Others believe it was systematic knowledge, passed deliberately through generations. Either way, the idea remains profound. The blizzard itself became a teacher, if you listened carefully enough. Now picture yourself in the lodge. The fire pops gently, but your ears are tuned to the outer world. A hollow boom echoes snow sliding down hides. You relax, That means weight has lifted. Then a groan above your shoulders tense. Someone rises, pokes at the roof with a pole to knock snow free, and the creaking stops. A whistle cuts along the edge of the wall. You feel a chill at your ankles where the draft sneaks in. Someone shoves a hide against the gap, muting the sound. In this constant symphony of storm and shelter, sound is both problem and solution. Oddly enough, storms could deceive. One oral account describes how a lull in the wind tricked families into believing the blizzard had ended. They stepped outside, only to be slammed by a sudden gust, snow blinding them instantly. From then on, elders warned, silence is not peace, it is the storm catching breath. That saying became a lesson, passed to children as both wisdom and warning. The sensory experience inside is overwhelming. Smoke hazes the air, the fire warms unevenly, but the sound dominates. Every creak and sigh feels amplified. You close your eyes, and it's as though the storm presses right against your eardrums, demanding attention. Yet instead of fear, you begin to feel intimacy. The storm becomes less an enemy and more a conversation partner. You learn to ask, is my roof safe? Is my wall holding? Are my ponies restless? And the storm, in its own harsh language, replies. Archaeological clues suggest this vigilance was constant. Excavated post holes and collapsed lodge remains show uneven snow loads crushed certain structures, while others endured. Those that survived likely belonged to families who listened, who tended, who acted when the storm spoke. The debris left behind is silent now, but you can almost hear echoes of the warnings that once rattled those poles. One humorous story, passed in winter tales, describes a boy who mistook the rumble of his own stomach for the groan of the roof. He panicked, shouting that the shelter would fall, sending the family scrambling to prop poles. When laughter followed, he learned the difference between hunger and hazard. Even mistakes became lessons, turning anxiety into memory. The debate among scholars continues. Was storm listening purely practical, or did it blur into spirituality? Did families hear not just warnings of snow and wind, but voices of spirits in the storm? Some ethnographers argue that songs and chants mirrored blizzard sounds deliberately, a way of conversing with the forces outside. Others caution against romanticizing, seeing it as functional rather than mystical. Yet as you sit here, ears filled with shrieks and moans, it's hard not to feel something alive in the blizzard's voice. Imagine yourself lying back now, robe pulled tight, fire dimming. Your eyes close, but your ears remain wide open. The lodge hums with sound wind pressing, poles straining, hides fluttering, snow sliding. It is not music, not exactly, but it has rhythm. You breathe in time with it, body swaying faintly as if lulled. Outside, the storm is chaos. Inside, through listening, it becomes a strange kind of lullaby. And here lies the quiet truth. Blizzards don't just punish, they also teach. If you can hear them, truly hear them, they reveal what must be done. The storm becomes less random, less terrifying, when translated into creaks and whistles you understand. You lie in darkness, smiling faintly at the thought, letting the blizzard's voice guide you, protect you, and even soothe you towards sleep. The blizzard's voice becomes familiar, almost soothing, but sooner or later the storm forces you to move. You imagine strapping on snowshoes, those wide latticed frames that keep your feet from sinking, and stepping out into a world where every direction looks the same, white, endless, hostile. Snow hisses against your hood, wind pushes at your chest, and every step feels like walking across a frozen sea. It's in these moments, far from camp, that improvisation decides whether you return alive. Accounts from explorers and native oral histories both describe hunters caught by sudden storms, their journeys halted mid-trail. When snow piled too high to push forward, and darkness pressed too quickly to go back, they stopped where they stood. With only what they carried, they built makeshift lean-tos, snow burrows, or hasty shelters that might last just a night. It is well recorded that without such emergency skills, many would have vanished into the storm. One striking detail comes from Ojibwe traditions. Hunters sometimes carried a small bundle of birch bark at all times. Even on short trips, birch bark caught fire in almost any condition, its oils igniting even when damp. With a scrap of bark and a few bent branches, a man could create a lean-to against a snowbank and keep a tiny fire burning long enough to wait out the night. Imagine being miles from your lodge, building a wall of sticks in a V shape, covering it with bark and snow, and crawling inside, cramped, smoky, but alive. Researchers still debate how often such improvised shelters were necessary. Some argue they were common, routine even, given the unpredictability of winter. Others suggest they were rare, desperate measures remembered in story because of their drama. Archaeology leaves little trace of such temporary structures, so the argument continues. But whether frequent or exceptional, the knowledge was always there, waiting in case the sky betrayed you. Picture the scene more vividly. You're trudging on snowshoes when the wind shifts suddenly, erasing your tracks behind you. Panic flares, you no longer know which way leads home. You find a cluster of spruce trees, their branches low and heavy with snow. You duck inside, the boughs forming a natural roof. With your knife, you cut a few more branches, weave them into a wall, and pile snow against the gaps. In minutes, you've made a pocket where wind cannot reach. You crouch inside, knees pulled tight, and strike your flint to the birch bark. The flame sputters, then catches, and the shadows of branches dance wildly around you. The blizzard screams outside, but in this cocoon of improvisation, you breathe again. Oddly enough, some oral stories describe hunters singing in these tiny shelters, not just for comfort but to steady their rhythm of breath. Singing slowed panic, kept air moving in the cramped space, and turned fear into something structured. Imagine your own voice trembling at first, then growing steadier, until the storm's howl outside becomes a duet with your song. The sensory experience here is raw. The smell of singed spruce needles fills the air. Smoke clings to your hood, irritating but strangely comforting. Your knees ache from crouching, but the heat of the small fire seeps into your chest. Every sound, the pop of bark, the whistle of wind through gaps feels magnified. You are alone, yet not entirely. The shelter you built feels like another presence, fragile but loyal. Archaeological evidence points indirectly to such practices. Small concentrations of charcoal in unlikely places, isolated ridges, sheltered river bends, hint at temporary fires left behind by stranded travelers. They are ghosts of nights like this, when survival meant building a refuge from almost nothing. You can almost see the blackened patch in snow, the faint circle where someone once huddled, fire crackling low, heart pounding against the cold. Scholars disagree on whether these improvisations were considered part of daily training. Some suggest young people were deliberately taught to build emergency shelters as rites of passage. Others believe the skills were absorbed informally, practiced during play and hunts. Whatever the method, the outcome was clear. Even in the loneliest whiteouts, people carried with them the memory of how to carve safety out of branches and snow. There's a kind of humor in imagining how clumsy these shelters might have looked to an outsider. A crooked wall of branches, a half-collapsed roof of snow, smoke filling every corner. Yet inside, the hunter grinned in relief, proud of the crooked creation that kept him alive. You might smile with him, realizing that perfection was never the goal, only endurance. The storm roars outside, shaking your tiny refuge, but it holds. You press closer to the fire, humming softly, eyes closing. For tonight, you do not need a grand earth lodge or a carefully painted tipi. You need only branches, bark, snow, and the will to keep building, even with numb fingers. And as your song fades into drowsiness, you feel the storm's power lessen. You have not defeated it, you have simply refused to surrender. The lean-to creaks under the weight of snow, your song fading into silence. You press your cheek against your knees and drift in and out of shallow sleep. When dawn finally bleeds through the cracks, you crawl out into a landscape transformed. The storm has quieted, leaving behind mountains of snow that glitter in cruel brightness. It is beautiful, but you know the beauty hides danger. And for children, these mornings after a blizzard are both a playground and a classroom. Travelers' notes and native oral traditions alike emphasize that children were not spared the lessons of winter. From a young age, they were folded into the rhythm of survival. They learned by imitation, by play, and by enduring the cold in carefully measured doses. It is well recorded that games were often thinly veiled training exercises, preparing them for the day when they too would face a storm alone. One curious example comes from Ojibwe accounts. Children played at building miniature wigwams from twigs and bark, then banking them with snow. They crawled inside, giggling, while smoke from a tiny fire smudged their faces. What looked like fun was practiced small hands rehearsing the skills that would one day save adult lives. Imagine a circle of children laughing as they collapse their shelters on purpose, learning through failure what not to do. Historians continue to argue over how deliberate this education was. Some suggest elders intentionally disguised survival lessons as games, making training enjoyable. Others believe children naturally imitated adult work, turning tasks into play without conscious design. Either way, the result was the same. By the time they were grown, storm knowledge was second nature, woven into muscle and memory. Picture the morning after a storm in a winter camp. Children tumble out of lodges, their boots sinking into drifts. They shout and laugh, pelting each other with snowballs that sting but do not wound. They dig tunnels through banks, crawl inside, and imagine themselves warriors in fortresses. Parents watch, smiling faintly, knowing that every snowball fight teaches reflexes. Every tunnel teaches the feel of snow's strength and weakness. Oddly enough, even simple sliding on hides down snowy slopes carried lessons. Children learned how to move across ice, how to balance, how to fall without breaking bones. These games, so joyful, were rehearsals for the dangerous treks of adulthood: long hunts, icy rivers, sudden blizzards. You can hear their shrieks of delight echoing across the camp, notes of joy stitched into the fabric of survival. The sensory details are vivid. Snow squeaks under tiny moccasins. Frost glitters on eyelashes. Laughter rings out, cutting through the hush left by the storm. Smoke rises from lodges in soft columns, blending with the white breath of ponies and dogs. To outsiders, it might look like carefree play, but to those within, it is also the sound of resilience being practiced one giggle at a time. Archaeological hints add weight to these accounts. Small artifacts, miniature bows, toy dolls dressed in fur, tiny snowshoe frames have been unearthed at winter campsites. They are more than playthings. They are training tools, designed to make practice indistinguishable from joy. Imagine a child strapping on toy snowshoes, tripping, laughing, and trying again until walking on drifts becomes natural. The storm becomes less frightening when you've rehearsed its challenges since you could walk. There's humor in these scenes too. Oral stories tell of mischievous children daring each other to lick icicles or to see who could stay outside the longest without flinching. Inevitably, one returned with a frozen nose, prompting laughter and scolding in equal measure. These moments were embarrassing at the time, but years later, those same children told the stories with pride. Their scars and memories became proof that they had been tempered by winter. Scholars debate whether children faced more danger in this kind of upbringing compared to sheltered lives in warmer climates. Did exposure harden them at the cost of comfort, or did it give them the endurance that meant the difference between life and death? The debate remains, but the voices of elders in oral history insist. Children who played in snow grew into adults who survived storms. Imagine now sitting near the fire, watching a child crawl proudly out of a snow tunnel. Their cheeks are flushed, their breath steaming. They raise their arms as if they've conquered the blizzard itself. Parents clap softly, encouraging, while other children cheer. You realize the storm has been turned into a teacher, shaping the youngest long before they ever face its full fury alone. You close your eyes, the the sound of laughter still echoing. The blizzard may return tonight, heavier, sharper, deadlier. But in this moment, children's games prove that survival is not just about enduring hardship. It is about transforming hardship into play, turning fear into familiarity. And that transformation is its own kind of warmth, perhaps stronger than fire or fur. Children's laughter fades as evening falls, and the village settles once more into the rhythm of firelight and furs. Outside, the storm sharpens again, snow striking hides with a steady tattoo. Inside, the hush of winter night thickens. In this stillness, elders begin to speak. Their voices are low, steady, cracked with age, but they carry the weight of countless winters. For generations, stories have been the hearth of memory. And during blizzards, those stories are as essential as firewood. It is well described in travelers' journals that elders often filled storm nights with tales. They were not idle diversions. These narratives taught survival when to bank snow, how to listen for cracking ice, why to keep embers alive. Wrapped in the cadence of story, knowledge seeped into the minds of the young, easier to remember than any lecture. A child might not recall instructions barked during a crisis, but they would recall the myth of a hunter who ignored the wind's warning and paid dearly for it. One curious detail preserved in oral tradition is the way these stories blurred fact and spirit. An elder might describe a winter when a teepee nearly collapsed under snow, then shift seamlessly into a tale of the snow woman, a spirit who tested families with her weight. The message was clear. Whether you called it physics or spirit, the lesson was the same. Strengthen your shelter, respect the storm. Imagine a circle of children listening, eyes wide, as the line between memory and myth vanished in the smoke. Experts continue to disagree about how much literal history is embedded in such tales. Some argue that they are primarily symbolic, others that they preserve direct memory of past winters in poetic form. The debate remains unresolved, but one thing is certain. The blizzard was always present in these narratives, both as villain and as teacher. Picture the scene more closely. Firelight flickers on wrinkled faces, shadows rising and falling like dancers on the hide walls. An elder leans forward, staff across their knees, and begins. The children lean in, dogs lift their heads. Even the storm outside seems to hush, as though listening. The elder speaks of a winter when rivers froze so deep that horses walked across them as if on stone. They recall nights when snow piled higher than door flaps, when only stories and songs kept spirits from breaking. Every sentence is a thread, weaving warmth stronger than any robe. Oddly enough, some tales were humorous. An elder might describe a foolish young man who tried to chase deer during a blizzard, only to run in circles and collapse right outside his own lodge. Children squealed with laughter. Adults chuckled knowingly. Beneath the humor lay the lesson. Storms confuse, and overconfidence can kill. Yet wrapped in comedy, the warning stuck. Archaeological traces echo these nights of storytelling. At winter sites, carved bone figures, etched stones, and decorated hides have been uncovered objects likely used to illustrate tales. Imagine an elder holding up a carved bison, letting firelight flicker across it as they describe the beast standing against a blizzard. Such props gave stories form, anchoring lessons in sight as well as sound. The sensory texture of these evenings is unforgettable. The fire's crackle syncs with the rhythm of speech. Smoke curls upward, turning the words hazy, almost ethereal. Outside, wind wails like a rival storyteller. But inside, the elder's voice dominates, slow and measured. You breathe in the smoky air and feel each syllable settling into your bones, as though the storm itself is being rewritten into memory you can carry. There's a phrase in one oral account, "The storm eats the careless." Harsh but true. Elders repeated such phrases not to frighten children unnecessarily, but to carve survival into their instincts. You can almost hear the repetition, the cadence like a drumbeat. Listen to the wind, feed the fire, stay close to each other. These mantras became second nature, a quiet shield stronger than any wall. Scholars still puzzle over how much of this oral wisdom influenced later generations when new technologies arrived: axes, wool blankets, log cabins. Did the stories lose their weight? Or did they simply adapt, carrying new lessons about chimneys and glass windows instead of smoke holes and buffalo hides? The answer is elusive, but even today, echoes of those storm nights linger in the way communities speak of winter with respect, never mockery. Imagine yourself drifting towards sleep now, wrapped in fur, listening to the elder's voice. Outside, snow presses hard, but the story holds you steady. You picture the snow woman leaning against the lodge, testing its strength. You imagine the foolish hunter running in circles. You remember the mantras: listen, feed, stay close. The storm is still there, but inside your mind, the voice of the elder is louder. You close your eyes, the tale still murmuring. In the end, survival is not only about hides, snowbanks, or fires. It is also about memory. Stories passed like coals from one generation to the next. You feel yourself holding one of those coals now, tucked carefully in your chest. And with it, you know you will see the dawn. The elder's tale lingers in your mind long after the fire has burned low. You stir beneath your robe, eyes opening to the faint glow of embers. The storm outside still roars, yet in this quiet space between sleep and waking, you feel another rhythm, the pattern of daily chores that never stop, even in blizzards. Because survival isn't only about waiting, it is about doing, maintaining, adjusting, tending. Every hour brings tasks, and every task decides whether the shelter will hold. Historical accounts are clear. During long storms, life inside the lodge became a cycle of constant upkeep. Snow had to be knocked from roofs before weight collapsed them. Fire pits needed clearing, ashes shoveled out to keep oxygen flowing. Furs were shaken to prevent dampness, water fetched from melted snow. It is well recorded that families rotated duties, each person playing a role, so that no one collapsed from exhaustion while the storm pressed on for days. One curious task involved tightening lashings on lodge poles. Rawhide bindings, stiffened by frost, could snap if ignored. Elders and youths alike would crouch near the walls, fingers numb, reheating straps over embers before refastening them. The smell of scorched hide filled the air, acrid yet reassuring proof that the structure was being kept alive. Imagine yourself holding such a strip, bending it carefully near the fire until it softens, then rushing to tie it back before it freezes stiff again. Scholars disagree about how much work such maintenance demanded. Some argue that families could rest for long stretches, shelters holding strong without constant attention. Others insist that upkeep was relentless, with someone always awake to guard against collapse or suffocation. Archaeological evidence of collapsed structures leans toward the latter. Vigilance was not optional, it was required. Picture the scene in detail. Snow slides off the roof with a muffled thump as someone pokes from inside with a pole. Another person rises, stirs the fire, and scatters fresh wood chips into the flames. Children collect snow in clay pots, setting them near the hearth to melt for drinking water. Dogs shake out their fur, spraying droplets that hiss when they strike the coals. Every movement feels small, but together they weave the fragile net that keeps death at bay. Oddly enough, some of these chores became rituals of comfort. A mother might hum while brushing snow from robes, turning the task into a lullaby. A father might carve small toys for children while trimming kindling, blending work with play. In this way, maintenance was not just duty, it was rhythm, a song of survival repeated until it became second nature. The sensory world is rich. Your hands smell of smoke and leather. The floor is cool beneath your knees as you sweep ash aside. The crackle of wood joins with the moan of wind, the two sounds overlapping like rival drummers. You feel sweat bead on your forehead, even as frost gathers on your eyelashes. The contradiction is constant heat and cold wrestling over every breath. Archaeological hints affirm these cycles. At old winter campsites, thick layers of ash show how fires were fed constantly, their pits scraped clean and refilled day after day. Traces of melted snow vessels, stone bowls, clay pots speak of the endless work of turning ice into water. These fragments whisper of hands always moving, even when storms locked the world outside. Scholars continue to puzzle over whether these tasks were shared equally. Did men focus on structural upkeep while women tended fires and food? Or did necessity blur such divisions, everyone doing whatever was needed? The written accounts vary, but oral histories often suggest a more fluid picture. In blizzards, survival overrode custom, and hands of any age or gender did the work that had to be done. You glance around the imagined lodge now. A teenager pushes smoke aside with a stick, grumbling but smiling faintly. An elder scrapes a hide, muttering advice under their breath. A child toddles near the fire, only to be scooped back quickly by a watchful aunt. Each action is ordinary, almost dull, yet together they create an orchestra of persistence. You realize that boredom itself was a kind of victory, because boredom meant the shelter still stood. Oddly enough, boredom sometimes gave rise to creativity. People carved, sewed, sang, or told riddles while tending chores. One oral tale describes a family who invented a new game while scraping snow from the roof, competing to guess where the next slide would fall. Laughter mixed with labor, making the storm seem a little less cruel. As you adjust your robe in the firelight, you reflect on the truth embedded in these rhythms. Survival was not heroic, not dramatic. It was repetitive. Sweep, scrape, tie, melt, stir. Every action small, yet every action indispensable. The storm outside howled with grandeur, but it was beaten not with grandeur, only with persistence. You close your eyes, hearing once again the endless cycle. Thump of snow falling from the roof, hiss of water melting in the pot, crackle of fire, sigh of breath. This is the heartbeat of winter, steady and unbroken, and with every repetition, you know the lodge will stand another night. The cycle of chores carries on, steady as a drumbeat, but food eventually becomes the question that cannot be postponed. A shelter without warmth is death, yet a warm belly is the true fuel that keeps bodies fighting. In the middle of a blizzard, no hunt is possible. The snow blinds, the wind drowns every sound, and animals vanish into silence. So families turn inward, drawing on caches of food prepared in calmer months, trusting in the foresight that filled their lodges with sustenance before the storm ever came. Historical records speak plainly. Winter survival relied on preservation. Strips of bison, venison, or elk were cut thin, dried over smoky fires, and stored in skin bags. Corn, beans, and squash, the three sisters of agriculture, were strung, dried, or buried in pits lined with bark. Nuts cracked in autumn-filled woven baskets. It is well recorded that without this work of preservation, a single blizzard could starve a camp into desperation within days. One curious detail appears in some plains accounts. Pemmican, that dense mixture of dried meat, fat, and berries, was prized above all. It could be eaten as is, or melted into stews, lasting months without spoiling. Travelers noted its extraordinary concentration of calories, sometimes describing it as food for journeys through death. Imagine breaking off a chunk now dense, greasy, faintly sweet with choke cherries, and chewing slowly while the storm claws at the hides outside. Experts still debate the variety of foods cached for winter. Some argue diets were heavily meat-based, while others point to archaeological remains of seeds, nuts, and roots, showing more balance than outsiders assumed. The truth seems to rest in adaptability. Whatever could be dried, smoked, cached, or dug up from snow was fair game. Picture yourself in the lodge during a storm. A pot of stew simmers on the fire, its surface bubbling lazily. The smell is thick smoke, meat, herbs, and a faint sweetness of berries. Children stir restlessly, noses lifting, waiting for their portion. Adults ration carefully, ladling small servings to each. Every bite is precious, every chew an investment in survival. Oddly enough, the act of cooking itself carried risk. Too much fire meant too much smoke, or too much fuel wasted. Too little, and food remained raw, hard to digest in weary stomachs. Cooking became an art of balance, and every meal was a careful equation between fuel, time, and hunger. The sensory detail overwhelms you. The crackle of dripping fat hitting coals, the steam fogging your face when you lean over the pot, the taste of salt or sometimes the stark lack of it, depending on supplies. You chew slowly, letting warmth spread from tongue to belly, and realize that food is not just fuel, it is morale. Archaeological sites confirm this importance. Charred bones found in hearth pits suggest marrow was cracked and boiled for soup, every nutrient wrung from carcasses. Storage pits lined with bark and clay reveal how communities safeguarded corn or nuts from moisture and rodents. These traces prove what oral stories repeat, that food was more than sustenance, it was strategy. Scholars still puzzle over whether blizzard diets were monotonous or varied. Some insist the repetition of dried meat and corn wore down spirits. Others point to oral tales describing feasts even in storms, where a family might open a precious store of berries or honey as comfort. The truth, perhaps, is that monotony was the norm, but surprise treats were treasured, remembered for years afterward. Now imagine the joy of such a moment. A mother opens a pouch and pours a handful of dried blueberries into children's palms. Their eyes widen, laughter bursts out, and suddenly the storm seems a little less endless. You taste one too, tart and sweet, carrying the memory of summer sun into the heart of winter. There's humor here as well. One winter story tells of a man who tried to sneak extra pemmican at night, only to be caught when the grease smeared across his face glistened in firelight. The family laughed, but the lesson was firm. Hoarding endangered all. Food was community property, rationed carefully, because hunger shared was easier to bear than hunger divided. The smell of stew deepens, filling the lodge. The storm outside fades for a moment, as all focus shifts inward, to bowls passed hand to hand. You cradle yours, sipping slowly, savoring every drop. Warmth spreads through your chest, through your limbs, through your thoughts. For tonight, at least, the blizzard cannot starve you. The shelter is more than walls and fire. It is foresight, memory, and the taste of summer carried into snow. The stew simmers low, bellies warm, but another reality presses in. Food alone cannot sustain if water is absent. Snow covers everything, yet thirst remains a gnawing danger. You scoop a handful of snow instinctively, but cold shocks your mouth, and the melt chills more than it nourishes. Survival requires more than grabbing what falls from the sky. Water must be drawn, melted, tended, because even abundance can kill when taken wrong. It is well recorded in explorers' journals that native families treated snow carefully. Directly eating it in large amounts risked lowering body temperature, inviting hypothermia. Instead, snow was gathered into vessels, clay pots, bark containers, later metal kettles set beside the fire to melt slowly. The process turned raw frost into drinkable life, warming it just enough to avoid chilling the core. Imagine dipping a ladle into a steaming pot, lifting a scoop of water that moments ago was a frozen drift, and sipping slowly as relief spreads through every bone. One curious detail emerges from oral traditions. Children were often tasked with gathering snow, taught from an early age to choose the cleanest drifts, far from lodge walls where smoke and ash settled. They learned to read the snow's texture, knowing which melted faster, which held grit. Picture small figures trudging with baskets, laughing as they tumbled, their work disguised as play. Their efforts filled the pots that kept everyone alive. Researchers continue to debate how much blizzards limited access to rivers or lakes. Some argue that frozen waterways were still tapped, holes cut through ice with stone or iron tools, water hauled up in buckets. Others counter that snow melting was safer during storms, less exposure to wind and frostbite. Archaeological evidence shows both: chipped stones that may have been used for ice cutting, and soot-stained vessels perfect for melting snow indoors. Imagine the sensory world of this task. Snow squeaks underfoot as you gather it. Your hands ache with cold fur mittens, clumsy but necessary. Inside, the fire's warmth licks the pot, steam rising in faint curls. The smell is pure clean, almost sweet when compared to smoke-thick air. You sip, and the water feels like more than hydration. It feels like hope liquefied. Oddly enough, melted snow sometimes flavored poorly, tasting of smoke or ash from the fire. Families added herbs, or simply endured the bitterness. Some oral accounts describe dropping hot stones from the fire into water, both to speed melting and to sterilize. The hiss of stone hitting ice sent sparks of steam upward, startling children who squealed with delight. You can almost hear the sharp crackle, the sudden plume of vapor, the laughter it sparked amid hardship. There is a symbolic thread, too. Some traditions linked snow water with renewal, purity, or cleansing. Elders spoke of it as the sky's gift, fallen to earth in a form that required transformation. Drinking it directly risked pain, but melting it through fire turned it safe, like tempering a lesson until it could be absorbed. The act became more than practical. It was a metaphor for turning adversity into strength. Archaeologists have found stone-lined pits near winter campsites that may have served as snow reservoirs. These shallow depressions, filled with clean snow, could be covered with hides to keep it uncontaminated until needed. Such foresight speaks volumes. Even in the middle of plenty, care was required to avoid sickness. Scholars disagree on whether thirst was a greater danger than hunger in winter storms. Some insist dehydration came quickly, as dry air and hard work drained bodies faster than snow could replenish. Others argue that food shortages posed more consistent threats. The debate continues, but survivors' voices agree on one point. Water was never taken for granted, even when it blanketed the world in endless white. Picture yourself crouching now by the fire. A pot sits beside it, half full of melted snow, the steam fogging your eyelashes. You dip a wooden ladle, lift it to your lips, and drink. The warmth slides down, easing your throat, loosening your chest. For a moment you lean back and sigh. The blizzard may own the sky, but you have coaxed life from its icy gift. And in that act you understand the paradox. Storms kill with snow, but storms also save with snow. It is both enemy and ally, curse and blessing. The difference lies not in the storm itself, but in the hands that transform its cold weight into something you can drink, something you can carry forward another day. The water soothes your throat, the stew steadies your stomach, yet another enemy stirs within the lodge: fatigue. The storm drones endlessly, a white noise that drains the mind as much as the body. To sit still too long, to close your eyes too deeply, is to invite frostbite or worse sleep from which you never wake. Survival in blizzards is not only a test of structures or supplies, it is a war against exhaustion. Accounts from winter travelers describe families fighting drowsiness in rotation. Someone always tended the fire. Someone always checked the roof. Someone always stirred the sleepers if they sank too deeply. It is well recorded that even short lapses could lead to disaster, a roof collapsing, a fire dying, or a sleeper's breath slowing in the cold. The community became a chain of watchfulness, each link guarding the others. One curious practice emerges from oral stories. People sang through the night, not only to calm children but to keep themselves alert. Low chants or steady drumming rhythms filled the lodge, warding off silence. The sound kept minds awake, bodies moving, and spirits from sinking. Imagine the hum now, a chorus that rises and falls like the storm itself, voices intertwining until sleep is postponed a little longer. Researchers still disagree about whether exhaustion was more physical or psychological. Some argue that the cold drained calories so quickly that weariness was inevitable. Others point to the monotony of storm days, the endless darkness that blurred hours together, eroding morale. Archaeological evidence offers no clear answer, but soot-stained lampstones suggest nights stretched long, firelight flickering as people tried to keep wakefulness alive. Picture the lodge in detail. A child stirs, rubbing eyes heavy with sleep. An aunt nudges them gently, pressing a warm drink into their hands. A hunter leans against the wall, nodding, until someone claps his shoulder and hands him a drum. The beat begins, slow and steady, and soon the lodge is pulsing with rhythm. Sleep loosens its grip. The fire glows brighter, as though fed by the music. Oddly enough, humor often kept weariness at bay. Families told riddles, teased one another, or recounted embarrassing memories. Laughter shook off drowsiness better than stern commands. One winter tale tells of a man who, desperate to keep himself awake, stuffed snow down his own collar, leaping up with a shout that sent the children into hysterics. The memory of such antics warmed spirits long after the storm had passed. The sensory details are sharp. Smoke makes your eyes ache, lids heavy, but the drumbeat stirs you awake. The smell of fat dripping on coals keeps your stomach engaged. A draft brushes your ankle, and you shift position, reminded that vigilance is necessary. Even discomfort becomes a tool better to itch, sting, and ache than to slip into frozen slumber. Archaeological traces whisper of such wakefulness. Burned layers in hearth pits suggest fires fed continuously, never allowed to die. This could only have happened through constant tending, evidence of families trading sleep for safety. Every layer of ash is proof of eyes forced open when they longed to close. Scholars puzzle over whether these rotations were formalized. Did camps designate official firekeepers, or did instinct drive everyone to take turns without planning? The debate persists, but what matters is the outcome. No lodge was ever left unwatched. To do so would be surrender. Imagine yourself now, fighting your own drowsiness. Your head nods, but a cousin hands you a stick, motioning to the roof. You rise, poke at the snow until it tumbles away, and the effort clears your mind. You sit again, drum in hand, tapping a rhythm. The fire brightens, children murmur, elders smile faintly. Exhaustion remains, but together, you hold it at bay. And you realize something profound. Survival is not only about strength, it is about vigilance, about refusing to let weariness steal what the storm could not. In the heart of the blizzard, the greatest shelter may be not wood or hide, but the collective promise, we will not fall asleep, not all at once. The drumbeat fades, replaced by steady breathing as the night drags on. Yet the storm doesn't relent. It prowls for weakness, testing every seam and stitch. And here, in the dim firelight, you recognize that shelter is never finished. It is alive, always demanding repair. Blizzards are merciless inspectors, and if you cannot mend as you endure, you will not last until spring. Historical records describe families rising in the midst of storms to patch tears in hides, shift poles, or rebuild snowbanks. It is well attested that repairs were not reserved for calm days. They were constant, urgent, and often improvised. A blizzard could rip a lodge open in moments, and hesitation meant frost-searing exposed skin. Picture yourself clutching a bone awl and sinew thread, sewing frantically while snow swirls in through a gap. Fingers stiff, eyes squinting in smoke. Every stitch is survival. One curious practice comes from Great Plains accounts. People kept extra hides rolled near the entrance, ready to be thrown over weak spots. These acted like emergency patches, slapped against walls as wind tore through. The hides smelled of smoke and grease, heavy and stiff, but they bought precious time. Imagine the sudden thud as a robe is heaved into place, muffling the draft, children sighing in relief as warmth steadies again. Experts continue to argue about how often lodges collapsed entirely. Some historians claim they were sturdy enough to withstand nearly any storm, while others point to reports of whole camps flattened by drifting snow. Archaeological evidence of collapsed pole circles supports the latter. The truth lies somewhere in between. Most shelters endured, but only because people never stopped tending them. Visualize the scene in detail. A teenager holds a torch while an elder leans against the wall, tightening lashings. The fire sputters as cold air slashes in, yet hands keep working. Dogs bark nervously, sensing the instability. Finally, the seam holds, the torch lowers, and the family exhales together. Repairs are not dramatic victories, they are fragile pauses in the storm's assault. Oddly enough, some oral tales turn these moments into legends. One story recalls a man who braced a pole with his own back through an entire night, refusing to move until dawn broke. His body froze stiff, but the lodge stood. Children hearing this tale laughed at its exaggeration, yet the message endured. Sometimes flesh itself becomes the patch when nothing else remains. The sensory detail of repair work is unforgettable. The acrid smell of singed hide as a patch brushes firelight. The rasp of sinew pulled tight, squeaking against frozen leather. The thud of snow knocked free from poles, sending cascades of white into the lodge. Each sound blends into the storm's rhythm, a counter-melody of resistance. Archaeological finds confirm the cycle of repair. Layers of overlapping hides in collapsed lodges, multiple generations of lashings around poles, scorched edges from fire damage, all reveal a culture that never abandoned structures but renewed them constantly. These shelters were not fragile. They were resilient because they were maintained relentlessly. Scholars still puzzle over whether repair duties fell more heavily on certain members. Some argue women managed interior mending while men handled external bracing. Others believe necessity blurred those lines. Anyone awake with hands free took the task. Oral accounts support the latter, hinting at shared urgency that trumped custom when snow threatened to crush the roof. Now place yourself in that urgency. You kneel in the dim firelight, patch in hand. Your breath fogs the air. Your fingers ache, but the stitch holds. The draft eases, the fire brightens, and children nestle deeper into furs. You wipe sweat from your brow, though frost still clings to your lashes. For a moment, you smile. The storm has not won tonight. And in that act of mending, you understand something deeper. A shelter is not a finished product, it is a relationship. You feed it with work, and it feeds you with survival. The blizzard tries to tear it apart, but stitch by stitch, you declare your refusal to yield. You sit back, needle in hand, listening as the wind claws again. The lodge groans, but it holds. Tomorrow you may repair again. Tomorrow the storm may find a new weakness. But tonight, your stitches are enough. Tonight the walls breathe with you, patched and strong, an ally against the endless snow. The patched seams hold, the poles stand firm, and the fire steadies once more. Yet as the storm drags on, you discover another challenge creeping in through the edges of the lodge: dampness. The snow outside presses tight, melting slowly from the heat within, seeping downward until hides sag, mats grow heavy, and bedding turns clammy. Cold is an obvious killer, but wetness is its silent accomplice. To survive a blizzard, you must battle not only wind and frost, but moisture that creeps like a patient predator. It is well recorded in winter accounts that dampness weakened shelters more than outright collapse. Smoke-hardened hides could resist snow, but once saturated, they lost their insulation, stiffened, and froze into boards. Grasses and reeds used for bedding rotted if left wet too long, releasing musty odors. Families spent hours shaking furs, propping mats, shifting bedding closer to fire, always aware that damp meant weakness. One curious technique appears in stories from northern tribes. Snow itself was used as insulation against damp. Rather than clearing every drift from the outside of a lodge, people sometimes packed it deliberately against walls. Snow, paradoxically, trapped air and reduced melting, acting like a blanket that held moisture in place rather than letting it soak through. Imagine pressing handfuls of snow tighter around your shelter, sealing it not to keep water out, but to control it. Scholars continue to debate how well this method worked. Some argue snowpacking made lodges warmer and drier, others insist it risked collapse once thaw began. Archaeology offers few answers. Melt leaves no trace, but oral traditions insist on its wisdom. Perhaps it was a gamble that paid off more often than it failed. Picture the lodge from within. A mother lifts a robe, shaking droplets free into the smoky air. Children scurry to spread grasses near the fire, letting them dry while elders poke at the roof, dislodging sagging clumps. The sound of dripping becomes constant, a rhythm that mixes with the crackle of flames. You reach down to your own bedding and feel it damp, cold, clinging. You wince, then shift closer to the fire, rubbing warmth back into the fabric. Oddly enough, dampness sometimes created unintentional humor. Stories tell of sleepers rolling into wet patches and waking with hair frozen to hides, tugging furiously while their families laughed. Children, in particular, treated dripping roofs as games, daring each other to sit beneath leaks until a drop hit their noses, laughter mixed with irritation, transforming misery into memory. The sensory details here are sharp. You smell mildew faintly at the edge of fur, mingling with smoke. You hear the hiss of droplets hitting coals, each one sending up a puff of steam. You feel clamminess against your skin, an ache that cold alone never caused. Wetness is insidious, it steals warmth slowly, invisibly, until suddenly fingers are numb and joints stiff. Archaeological findings hint at strategies for drying. Stones arranged around hearths, perhaps used to heat bedding. Layered mats suggesting rotation between wet and dry sets. Even racks within lodges where hides could be hung high in smoke to cure anew. These traces whisper of constant battle, fought not against roaring wind, but against slow, creeping damp. Researchers still puzzle over whether moisture was more dangerous in woodlands or plains. In forests, snow clung to branches and dripped steadily. On open plains, wind whisked snow dry, but driven drifts buried shelters deep. Each landscape offered unique challenges, each requiring vigilance. But the truth was the same everywhere. Dry meant warmth, wet meant weakness. Imagine yourself now, helping with this constant battle. You lift a mat, hang it near the smoke hole, and watch as steam curls upward. You feel the hide stiffen as it dries, hear the faint crackle as water evaporates. Around you, the family moves like an orchestra. One shakes, one hangs, one stokes, one props. Every motion small, but together they keep the blizzard from seeping deeper. And in that moment, you understand survival's paradox. The storm outside howls with violence, but what endangers most is something quieter, subtler: the drop of water, the slow sag of damp hide, the mildew that creeps without warning. To endure a blizzard, you must fight not only the obvious roar, but also the whispers of wetness. You glance at the fire, hear the hiss of another droplet falling, and smile grimly. The storm has not claimed you yet. With every shake, every drying mat, every hiss of steam, you declare again your refusal to be undone. The hiss of droplets fades as mats dry in the smoke, but another danger rises in the still air: breath itself. With every exhale, lungs release steam that clings to hides, poles, and furs. Dozens of breaths, night after night, turn a lodge into a cave of frost. Tiny crystals creep down walls, rim smoke holes, and cling to hair. The blizzard outside may freeze you directly, but inside, it works more subtly through condensation, the invisible tide of moisture flowing from your own body. It is well attested in winter accounts that frost buildup inside shelters was inevitable. Hides glittered in firelight with icy sheen, poles crusted with rime, bedding stiffened overnight. In the morning, children woke with lashes frozen together, their first act of the day to blink until vision cleared. Families accepted this as part of winter life, scraping frost from walls as casually as sweeping ash from hearths. One curious practice described in oral traditions was the deliberate scraping of frost at dawn. Elders used bone spatulas or flat sticks, gathering crystals into small piles, then tossing them into the fire to hiss and vanish. To children, this was entertainment, watching ice pop and vanish in sparks. To adults, it was necessity. Left unchecked, the frost would melt, soaking hides, and return as dampness, the old enemy in another form. Historians disagree on just how severe this frost buildup could be. Some explorers describe lodges glittering like ice palaces inside, dazzling yet suffocating. Others insist the smoke and fire kept interiors too warm for heavy accumulation. Archaeological traces of scraped hides suggest the truth leaned toward the first version. Frost was constant, and people became experts at managing it. Imagine the sensory detail now. You wake, breath puffing in a cloud before your face, only to notice crystals flaking from the ceiling. They fall with faint ticks onto bedding, melting instantly against warm skin. You brush them away, then help scrape the walls, the tool rasping softly against frozen hide. The fire pops as you toss frost into it, steam curling upward. The storm outside moans, but here inside, the war is fought quietly, with sticks and patience. Oddly enough, some oral tales gave frost a personality. Children were told that the frost people crept down lodge walls at night, painting everything white. If you did not scrape them away, they would grow bold, soaking bedding, biting toes. In this way, a chore became a story, transforming icy inconvenience into a battle of spirits that even the youngest could understand. The smell of frost is subtle, but you can sense it. Cold, sharp, clean like air snapped from the sky itself. It mingles with smoke, creating a paradox. Sharpness and heaviness, freshness and suffocation together. You inhale, and your chest tingles, caught between comfort and chill. Archaeological hints support the endurance of these routines. Microscopic analysis of old lodge sites shows salt deposits on interior surfaces, likely left from evaporated breath and sweat. These traces whisper across centuries that families exhaled warmth only to have it crystallize, forcing them to scrape their very breath off walls to stay dry. Scholars debate whether frost inside shelters was viewed with dread or simply tolerated. Was it seen as failure, proof of imperfection, or as an unavoidable part of winter life, a reminder that humans could never fully master the elements? Oral traditions suggest the latter. Frost was expected, respected, managed, not feared. Picture yourself scraping now, hands stiff around a bone spatula. Crystals flake off, tinkling faintly as they fall into a bowl. Children giggle, scooping them up, pretending to eat them before tossing them into fire. Elders nod approvingly, seeing lessons passed on. The task is small, repetitive, but strangely soothing. Every scrape is a reminder that breath itself is both life and hazard, warmth and threat. And in that moment, you realize the storm has invaded, in its quietest form, not through howling winds, but through your own lungs. Yet you also realize the answer is simple. Scrape, burn, repeat. The blizzard may be vast, but its smallest weapons can be defeated with persistence. You lean back, walls glittering faintly, frost thinning. The fire glows, children laugh, and for a moment, the lodge feels like a jewel box, glowing red and white, fragile but beautiful. The storm claws outside, but inside, even breath turned to ice is managed, tamed, and transformed into one more rhythm of survival. The walls sparkle faintly after scraping, glittering like stars caught inside the lodge. Yet beauty carries another threat. Hunger begins to whisper again. Days into a blizzard, stored foods thin. Stew pots shrink to smaller servings. Pemmican bags grow lighter, and the smell of roasted meat becomes more memory than reality. The storm tests not only structures and bodies, but stomachs too. Fasting, planned or forced, becomes part of the winter rhythm. It is well recorded in journals of early missionaries and traders that native families endured lean stretches by rationing carefully. Meals shrank to handfuls of dried meat, or bowls of thin broth made by boiling bones again and again until even marrow gave no more. Hunger gnawed, yet discipline kept the group alive. To share too generously one night was to starve the next. Imagine sitting by the fire with your stomach growling, ladle lifted to lips, knowing the portion is small but must suffice. One curious practice noted in oral histories was chewing leather during extreme hunger. Hides softened by boiling or gnawing offered little nutrition, but they gave the jaw work, and the mind illusion of eating. Children were sometimes given scraps of rawhide to chew, their eyes brightening at the ritual though their bellies stayed hollow. You picture the sound soft, steady gnawing mingling with the wind's moan, a chorus of endurance in the storm. Historians disagree over how frequent starvation was during blizzards. Some claim families planned well enough that true famine was rare. Others argue storms lasting weeks could exhaust even the best-prepared caches. Archaeological evidence of bone fragments boiled until chalky suggests desperation sometimes did take hold. The truth, as always, lies between extremes. Preparation worked, but nature occasionally overwhelmed it. Picture the lodge on the fourth or fifth day of a storm. Firelight dim, food nearly gone. A parent stirs a pot that smells faintly of meat, though its contents are mostly water. Children slurp eagerly, eyes shining despite thin broth. Adults chew slowly, letting each bite linger, teaching patience with every swallow. No one speaks much, the growl of bellies is conversation enough. Oddly enough, fasting carried spiritual weight too. Some traditions saw hunger as cleansing, a trial that tested spirit as well as body. Elders told children, "The storm teaches through emptiness." In this framing, famine was not only curse but lesson. You feel that duality now, pain in the belly, but also pride in enduring it, a strange strength drawn from weakness. The sensory details sharpen in hunger. The smell of smoke and fat seems thicker, almost cruel. Every crackle of fire sounds like roasting meat. Even water tastes rich, as though your tongue has grown desperate enough to savor anything. The mind plays tricks, conjuring feasts from memory berries bursting with juice, venison sizzling, corn roasting in husks. You taste them in imagination, even as reality offers nothing but broth. Archaeological traces speak to famine strategies. Crushed bones, burned hooves, even charred seed husks appear in winter layers, proof that nothing was wasted. Hunger turned every scrap into potential food. Imagine gnawing a bone polished smooth, then burning it for one last bit of flavor in soup. To outsiders it might seem desperate, but to those inside, it was simply survival. Scholars still puzzle over how hunger shaped community bonds. Did scarcity spark conflict or deepen cooperation? Some argue fights erupted over dwindling portions. Others note oral tales of generosity, where elders gave their shares to children without hesitation. Perhaps both were true, depending on circumstance. But the stories that endure emphasize sacrifice, the old feeding the young, ensuring survival carried forward. Now imagine the moment when the pot is nearly empty. A grandmother takes her share, then quietly passes it to a child. The child gulps it down, unaware of the sacrifice. The grandmother smiles faintly, leans back, and closes her eyes. The storm rages, but the act of giving becomes warmth itself, radiating through the lodge. Oddly enough, humor still found its place even in famine. Stories tell of hunters exaggerating the meals they dreamed, of buffalo so large it filled the whole lodge, berries rolling in waves across the plains. Children laughed, bellies aching less for a moment. The storm could steal food, but it could not steal imagination. You sip the thin broth in your mind, tongue lingering on its faint taste of smoke. Hunger claws at you, but you endure. You look around the circle, family, neighbors, animals, and realize that survival is not measured only in full stomachs. It is measured in patience, sacrifice, and the quiet knowledge that spring will come and the storm cannot last forever. The hunger gnaws, the storm howls, and time begins to stretch. Hours blur into days, the fire reduced to glowing embers, conversations dwindling into murmurs. In this suspended state, you realize survival is not just about food or shelter, it is about spirit. The mind, battered by monotony and fear, must find ways to endure. Stories help, but so do rituals. Small acts of meaning repeated until they anchor the heart against the storm's emptiness. It is well recorded in ethnographic accounts that blizzards became times of ceremony. Families sang to steady their breath, prayed to spirits of wind and snow, or placed offerings into the fire. Even a pinch of tobacco or a scrap of meat, burned deliberately, transformed desperation into devotion. In giving, they reminded themselves that survival was not mere clinging, it was part of a larger balance with the world. One curious practice described in Lakota winter tales was the use of painted stones near the hearth. Families marked small rocks with symbols, spirals, animals, sunbursts, and placed them beside the fire. These firestones were believed to carry warmth into the spirit world, guiding ancestors to watch over the living. Imagine tracing a spiral with your fingertip as snow hammers the walls, drawing comfort from the thought that unseen eyes keep vigil with you. Scholars remain divided over how much these rituals were religious versus psychological. Some argue they were sacred, tied to cosmology. Others frame them as coping mechanisms, practical tools for morale. The debate may never end, but both sides agree. Ritual gave structure to chaos, turning endless white nights into ordered time. Picture the lodge now. The fire crackles weakly, shadows flickering across tired faces. An elder sprinkles herbs onto the flames. A sweet scent rises: sage, cedar, perhaps sweetgrass, and the smoke curls differently, softer, gentler. Children watch wide-eyed. Adults breathe deeper. For a moment, the lodge feels less like a prison of snow and more like a sanctuary. Oddly enough, some oral accounts describe families joking with the storm itself. They spoke to the blizzard as though it were a stubborn guest. "Eat all you like, but leave us some." Such banter blurred fear into humor, defanging the storm's power with words. You smile, imagining a family laughing at their own boldness, while outside the wind screamed unbothered. The sensory world of ritual is thick. The fire smells sweeter with herbs, its smoke soothing lungs. The sound of chanting blends with the wind, voices rising and falling until storm and song become indistinguishable. Warmth spreads not just from flames but from belief, from rhythm, from connection to something greater than hides and snowbanks. Archaeological hints support ritual presence. Charred bundles of herbs, carved stones near hearths, even animal bones arranged deliberately suggest ceremonies threaded through daily survival. These artifacts whisper that meaning mattered as much as material in enduring winter's siege. Researchers still puzzle over how rituals shifted with lengthening storms. Did families create new ceremonies to fill the days, or cling more tightly to old ones? Did storms deepen faith, or test it? The evidence points both ways, but the stories that survive speak of resilience, belief as fuel when bodies weakened. Imagine yourself kneeling near the fire, holding a small carved stone. Its surface is warm from proximity to coals. You close your eyes, whisper a hope for the storm to ease, for the children to grow, for the dawn to come. You place the stone back, feel the warmth linger in your palm, and believe, if only for a moment, that someone heard. And in that belief, you recognize a deeper truth. Shelter is not only poles and hides, it is also faith, ritual, story. The storm tries to empty life of meaning, to reduce you to flesh shivering in cold. But with every chant, every offering, every whispered joke, you declare, "We are more than this storm." The blizzard still rages, yet your heart steadies. Hunger remains, dampness persists, but spirit has been renewed. You look around the circle and see the same quiet strength in others' faces. Together, you are not merely surviving, you are enduring with purpose. The storm lingers, though its voice grows hoarse. Days of howling give way to muffled silence, the kind that comes when snow lies deep and heavy across the world. Inside the lodge, you sense it too, the rhythm slowing, the urgency easing. Fires still burn, but not with frantic tending. Children stir more freely, laughter returning in louder bursts. For the first time in what feels like forever, you dare to believe. The blizzard's teeth are dulling. It is well attested in winter narratives that when storms broke, relief was not immediate. Families moved cautiously, testing the air, wary of drifts collapsing or roofs giving way. Survival demanded patience even in victory. Only after care did they step outside, blinking against sudden brightness. Imagine crawling through the lodge flap and seeing the world buried, shapes of ponies half hidden, trees bent low, river frozen in silence. The danger was not gone, but it had changed shape. One curious ritual recounted in oral stories was the greeting of the sun after storms. Elders instructed children to step outside and raise hands to the sky, offering thanks for light returned. To outsiders, it may have seemed quaint, but to those who endured days of darkness, the gesture was profound. Imagine the sting of light on your face, snow glittering painfully, yet your chest swelling with gratitude. Researchers debate whether recovery after storms was more dangerous than the storm itself. Some argue exhaustion made people reckless, venturing out too soon. Others claim relief gave them energy enough to rebuild quickly. Archaeology provides hints: collapsed lodges left unrepaired, hastily abandoned sites, but also evidence of renewed fires and repaired tools. The truth lies in balance. Storms ended, but vigilance never did. Picture the scene inside the lodge during the first quiet morning. Adults stretch stiffly, dogs bark at muffled sounds outside, children chatter eagerly. The fire burns low, its smoke trailing lazily now that wind no longer claws at vents. The air feels softer, though still cold. Relief is not joy exactly. It is something quieter, heavier, like a long sigh released. Oddly enough, storms' endings often sparked humor. Families teased one another for fears confessed in the dark, or reenacted frantic moments of repair. One tale tells of a man who slept through an entire blizzard, snoring while others worked, only to wake and boast of his strength. Laughter rippled through the camp, lightening spirits as much as sunlight. The sensory details sharpen. You hear the creak of boots as someone dares to step outside. You smell fresher air, sharper, without the weight of snow-damp smoke. You feel your body relax, joints loosening, heart lifting. Survival has shifted from desperate defense to cautious rebuilding. Archaeological clues confirm these transitions. Layers of ash thin after storm periods, suggesting fires were allowed to shrink once skies cleared. Post holes show repairs, thicker lashings tied after shelters endured strain. Even discarded food bones reappear, hinting at feasts of relief when hunting resumed. These fragments remind you that survival was never a single victory, but a series of recoveries. Scholars still argue about what storms meant culturally. Were they feared only, or honored as teachers? Some point to stories portraying blizzards as cruel spirits, others to tales where storms are wise elders, forcing humans to remember humility. Both threads intertwine. Storms killed, but storms also taught. Now imagine yourself stepping outside. The snow crunches deep beneath your boots. The air is so sharp it almost rings in your ears. Yet above, the sky is wide and impossibly blue, the storm's fury washed away. You blink against the brightness, lungs filling with crisp air, and you smile faintly. You endured. You endured not by strength alone, but by shelter, by fire, by ritual, by laughter, by shared warmth. The blizzard will come again, perhaps tomorrow, perhaps next season. But tonight, for the first time in days, you feel safe. You glance back at the lodge, smoke curling gently upward, children tumbling outside into drifts. Life persists, fragile yet stubborn, and you know the storm has failed to erase you. Now the pace softens, like embers fading into ash. You breathe more slowly, letting tension slip from your shoulders. The storm's roar is memory now, its voice distant. What remains is calm, the steady hush of snow blanketing the world, the gentle crackle of fire, the warmth of bodies pressed close. You picture yourself lying down once more, robe drawn snug, head resting on soft furs. The air is still cool but no longer biting. Each exhale drifts like a sigh into the dim light. The lodge creaks faintly, but not in warning, only in rhythm. like a cradle rocking. Outside, stars prick the night sky, sharp and cold, but here inside, you feel wrapped in softness. The smoke hole glows faintly with moonlight. Dogs shift and sigh in sleep. Children murmur dreams. Elders breathe slow and even. The world is quiet, secure, safe enough to rest at last. You let your mind wander, not to storms but to calm mornings after, when the sun rises clear over sparkling snow, when the air tastes new and sweet. You imagine stepping outside into brightness, your breath mingling with light, your body alive and unafraid. Sleep beckons gently, not as danger now, but as comfort. You let go of vigilance, trusting the shelter, trusting the warmth, trusting that you will wake again. The blizzard has passed, and so too has its grip on your thoughts. Close your eyes, drift slowly, and let the last sound you hear be the whisper of snow settling outside. Safe, steady, enduring. You are still here, and that is enough.